Welcome to the Cryptozoology Show with your host, the Cryptozoologist. And this show, it's Ghosts of Ottawa and many other locations and different legends about them, odd cryptid, ghostly like nature, real Grim Reaper sighting. From haunted toilets to castles, let's check out if our possible afterworld relatives are still hanging out with us here that we're not seeing too often. Real possible witches of the weird, with a few living still possibly in Vanier. so Sean Key runs away from the werewolf Madeline and the gang, and now he's in just about a. He might run across a witch next. Maybe we'll get some new recordings. Which I'm looking forward to that almost. So hopefully he does run out across the Vanier witch. Maybe she's still around there, one of them. But anyways, we'll talk about them after here. So we have all kinds of covering here, from like the more spiritual, spritey, sort of weird, fiery, like sort of witches, ghostly things, to all kinds of other stuff, and a really bizarre cryptid. I'm just going to introduce a new cryptid each time, a really weird one that very few people ever talk about and things like that. And, we'll sort of cover from there. So I'm using a couple of these pictures at first just because they fit in with sort of what we're talking about and things like this. But I'm not really a big ghost person, but I've actually probably seen ghosts now several sort of that what you would, yeah, you know what I mean. So I'll cover these stories in here of sort of some of the weird sort of things I've read across. But I mean, I don't really like, this is the most sort of weirdest subject to me because like reading through historic things and seeing 10 zillion people that have said that they've seen a ghost. Well, even if I never did, I would accept that there's probably something to it, as well as all the tons of odd, bizarre photographs that were way before Photoshop and things like that. The negatives weren't tampered with, and that they appear some pretty weird things on them, right? And things like that. But besides all that, though, I've actually had some pretty weird experiences. I didn't ask for these things, nor did I want to see them. But I mean, nevertheless, I was out with different sort of people and things like that, and I've actually seen a few sort of really weird sort of things over the years. So some of them there were quite well known, where I was brought there for sort of entertainment value. They just wanted to see how I'd react to this, and sort of thing. And I'll talk about that one way later. But I went to a place in Montreal. That this lady owned this place, and she had a haunted toilet. so I mean, this is true. Like, I mean, crazy. I mean, hundreds of people saw this thing over probably about a decade span of her partying around there around the clock. She was a real sort of social sort of character. And I mean, every time that I went, I saw the same kinds of phenomena. I watched other people in total fear, that women that would normally running to the bathroom about every 5 seconds to see some of them, right? None of them wanted to go near this thing if hell froze over. They'd rather pee in a bucket and things like that, because a lot of them were creeped out by it. But anyways, so we got a lot to cover here. I'll cover more about that after. But I mean, sort of things like this, and there is more to sort of like the biblical thing. Definitely mentions this sort of thing. Pretty well any sort of thing, there is a spiritual afterworld. So whether the scientist guy wants to believe this or not, there's enough evidence out there that certainly there's something to this sort of a thing. And I don't believe myself personally that I hallucinated these things. I was with other people actually every time I was with every people sort of thing like that, where I was with other people, we're all watching the same sort of thing like this. And then I'm asking them, because I wanted to see in my mind what to correlate to make sure that what I was seeing, they're seeing, and they're saying the same thing, so they wouldn't know what my hallucination would be. You see what I mean? Like, so I'm very sort of interested in these things because even myself, I would wonder, like, right away, am I seeing something here, right? Sort of thing. So one of them I tried to explain, getting all kinds of volunteers and all kinds of things like that, and the most creepiest. And I mean, creepiest thing ever in the history of mankind that I've ever ran across with a sort of a bone chilling sort of thing to it that absolutely I have no explanation, but anyways, we'll talk about that after too. So, but it was ghosts of witches have been recorded since the earliest times. Many sorts, from ghostly horses to ghostly chicks, right? Witches from old scary-looking bats to pretty hot ones, right? So, let us explore this interesting phenomenon. We'll start off with sort of a ghost, and here I wanted to start off with a story that happened to me. I was a young fellow, just barely a sort of a teenager sort of idea. And I had these two brothers with me, which I've had a lot of adventures with. This is one of the same brothers that was with sort of me seeing that sort of a UFO thing. And I've had a lot of adventures with these sort of characters, right? And we actually, because they were with me quite often, when these odd things had occurred, they just luckily sometimes they were sort of with me, right? But we were coming back. There was the three brothers. There was myself, and there was one or two other kids, and for the life of me, I don't remember which ones because every night we'd go out and all these kinds of things. Even as a young, every sort of weekend there, we'd sort of go out and I'd keep them out of mischief there too much and get them more to fish and do things like that instead of getting themselves in too much mischief, sort of thing. Because back then we had nothing sort of like I said, there was no internet or Bugs Bunny, Nintendo sort of stuff to entertain. And the parents back then, they wanted to sort of boogie and stuff like that. So a lot of kids sort of weren't sort of they wanted them to go out somewhere for that sort of evening to go away for a few hours, right? So they could sort of boogie on down and all that kind of stuff like that. But anyways, we were out night fishing and sort of it got really sort of maybe around like midnight or so and things like that, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning sort of thing. And we ran out of sort of bait, so I was all peeved off, but they were biting like crazy, and they just kept sort of like one after another, all these catfish and things like that. We landed even two sturgeon and some eels and all kinds of crazy stuff. So anyways, totally now ran out of all this bait that I'd collected in the river for massive, a whole sort of day of collecting here for these sort of things. But anyways, we were coming back, and we weren't deciding on whose place we were going to sort of try and get one of the kid to go in and sort of get ourselves some sandwiches and stuff like that and sort of be quiet, right? And then we'd stay outside sort of and wait till sort of morning there and just go take off, go back home sort of thing. So we're coming back along, and there's this weird sort of a park there, the McDonald Park, that sort of cuts off along from sort of the rivers over here. But we were going to cut across and sort of because the guy's home was down sort of that way. And we ended up, we started walking along the park, and then we came to this gazebo here. To me, it looked sort of, but I mean, it was in the dark. I hadn't, it was weird because I'd never really visited this park much or anything like that. I was by it a few times, but I never actually stayed on it up until that point. But by this time, they were tired and they didn't want to sort of walk anymore. So we decided just to sort of rest and have a smoke and all that kind of stuff. So we're all sitting there and things like that. And then the oldest brother, he says, look at that little tramp, like this. So then I turn my head, and there's this girl that sort of almost looked like see-through. It was really weird. She was off in the distance. We were exactly on this sort of thing. So, like, imagine yourself, you're sitting there when we were sort of leaned up against it, but sort of like out on the grassy here a little bit, okay? So we were somewhere on that hillish part, sort of where that was behind our back. We weren't actually inside of it right at that moment. We were sort of on the edge of it here somewhere. We were having a smoke, right? And so we were staring out this way, and there's these buildings and there's other trees and stuff, but there's quite a bit of trees before you get to the street, right? So all the street is like lit up. You can see these parts and things like this. And this girl had this tiny little skirt that was so short that it was 3/4 way up her backside. So basically, her butt was sort of dancing out there, sort of ghostly naked. She had sort of weird, sort of like these stockings that something like. I don't know, like what's her name there? Pippi Longstocking would wear or something, right? So the big long sort of stockings, they seemed to be sort of a whitish color, and she had this sort of transparency, sort of looking sort of a top, and so she's going along, and she had these sort of weird, sort of like looking, possibly high heels of some sort, but you couldn't hear any sound from them or anything like this, but she was actually skipping. So then the other brother says, if that was my daughter, I'd put her over my knee and make her ass her. That's what the guy says, right? So I was just totally blown away by this. I was thinking, what kind of parent allows her young daughter like that? We couldn't, like, I mean, she couldn't have been much younger than, let's say, we would have been at the time. So in our age range, we would find her sort of a cute at that point in time, right? Sort of thing. So we're just totally like sort of blown away by this, and she's skipping along, and there's this one tree that she went sort of like this, and then on the other side, now she's not there. She just vanished, man. Like, I mean, completely vanished. This blew my mind, and my mind, I still think about it still, because it's the most convincing near thing, besides a few other weird things that I've seen, that, but especially this one, because I found out later that there was apparently some ghostly girl that haunts this sort of gazebo area here. I didn't know this at this time, never heard the story by up to that point, but I'm an actual sort of witness, along with these brothers and whoever these other two characters. I'm pretty sure there's two other characters with us. And but we were out. The bottom line with this is I can still sort of see her skipping along. You can actually see like her butt. Like, I mean, she looks sort of, but she was like weird, like almost like glowing, sort of transparency. And her shoes were sort of not looking sort of, they looked strange, like sort of like, but she was able to skip along with them like quite easily. Yet you normally, when I see ladies trying to run with high heels and stuff, when they're big spiky ones, they're sort of weird, like they it's hard for them to sort of do that quick. Like how she was doing it was so rhythmic, but she was like she had decent sort of long sort of hair to her on the side, like not massively long, but it was decent length, at least like shoulder length, a bit past that sort of idea. And it was sort of like this skirt, and then she had this sort of little thing on the top of it that seemed to be some kind of like little top of some sort, but like it was almost transparent sort of like thing, okay? But she's the socks you can see better, and I don't understand this why that would be, but they seem to be sort of more smoggy, like sort of thicker, right? Like, but white. You could tell they were white in the light. And it's impossible that this was a kid out running around somewhere. First of all, this is like extremely late at night for a young lady. Like, it was different in our sort of, we were all young sort of guys here with sort of pretty sort of modern sort of weird parents to them where they weren't so concerned about this. They just knew that everybody liked to sort of fish. We're only going fishing. We're not in trouble, and they want to do whatever, right? So like it was sort of different. Like they weren't sort of the same. But for a young lady, they wouldn't sort of allow her to be walking around pretty well half naked here, sort of at this time of night, right? So I found out later there was some story about some girl that some girl that was seen around this gazebo, and then I found out even more creepy is that this used to be a graveyard. So there was a graveyard here, and I found this old sort of citizen article about them mentioning it, dragging it up and stuff, and that they had found skulls and weird sort of things like that. So is that what we saw, man? But because it's impossible, I'm telling you, you can go check this place out yourself. I doubt much has probably changed. I haven't been there in many moons, but the thing is that if you go look there, you'll see there's a bunch of trees in front of you. This girl was right sort of like at the edge. She wasn't really out on the street fully, but she wasn't in the park fully. She was just like at the edge of between the grass and sort of the cement, and so I wasn't even sure half the time what if she was actually on the grass edge or on the cement edge, because it all lit up there, this sort of thing like that. But there was a lot of trees mixed in as she'd be going along, and all you can see on that side, there's walls there. It's all solid walled house like thing. In order for her to get anywhere, she would have had to run up to some door. You would have clearly seen her. We could see all the buildings there, like everything. So you see every sort of entranceway and a driveway or any sort of thing that's there. We could see this all. And we went right there and looked all around for her and all over in every trees and walked up and down the street and stuff like that. It was the weirdest, creepiest thing. Nearly, absolutely fascinated me still to this date. I wonder, like, was that this girl that some other people have seen around this gazebo? But nobody talks about this one as a haunted sort of place, but it certainly, there's some weird sort of ass stuff there, but this girl was sort of like in a weird sort of clothing that you would see. I don't know, like it didn't seem like 1800 stuff because her skirt was way too sort of kind of skanky, like short, really, right? Like, so maybe she was some kind of girl from one of those Catholic schools back then or something like that, because some of them would sort of, these young ladies, they didn't have, sometimes because of being poor and all this, they didn't have the right size, so some girls would end up having sort of like shorter, or I heard a lot of them would actually do it on purpose so that way they could, flash a little bit more, sort of idea, right? That sort of thing. But whatever the case, that could have been, she could have been something weird like that. Like she might have belonged to some kind of Catholic all-girls school of some sort back in the day, right? Or some kind of weird thing like that. But whatever it was, her skin was extremely sort of like palish, like you could almost see through it, and stuff like that. And she sort of, like, I don't think that she could have been any more than about, 11 or 12, like maybe 13. So anywhere from like 10 years of age to 13 years of age at the time. And because we weren't any sort of different, we were around that sort of age, right? So absolutely fascinating, sort of one of the more interesting, weirdest things I've ever run across in my entire life that still gives me the creeps. But I sort of like, because like I mean reading all these historic things even way before that, and running across even a few weird stuff where I heard some creepy noises inside of buildings and weird stuff where there was supposed to be nobody there already, even previous to that, I sort of like wasn't as sort of closed-minded to this once we seen it. But I tried everything in the world to answer these, and I always do. But this one I have no answer for, except it correlates that there was a girl seen thereafter, some ghostly girl. Maybe she looks like this. I never got a description of her, but I've heard the odd story of this sort of thing. but by third-handed people that sort of have, are interested in ghosts and things like that and that sort of thing. But anyways, I was able to find this old sort of article in the sort of paper, and a few other sort of weird things about it there. But I mean, as far as like a lot of witnesses go to it, I don't have sort of like, I've never sort of ran across any personally that I can sort of speak with or whatever. But anyways, that's what we saw. Absolutely the weirdest thing ever. And you know what I mean, but I mean, these guys were European, right? And I mean, they're all sort of serious, and the parents were serious. And yes, that girl would have had a red backside booty there, quite a bit. You know, back in those days, it wouldn't matter who the parent was. This, you know, she wouldn't have gotten away with this, right? Because I mean, that's something you can't be doing, leaping around at that time of night. I mean, even back then, there would have been the odd sort of drunkard or that werewolf guy down that I told you about at the Parliament buildings and that sort of thing like that, right? So I mean, there was definitely characters out there, right? So I mean, even then there was a few and that sort of thing. So I mean, uh, it's sort of like, I don't know. That's all I can say. It was extremely interesting and sort of like a very sort of weird sort of event, right? Sort of thing. Here, the Ottawa Rapids used to have tons of lumber going down a daily. The Mill restaurant that's around there, sort of. They make a decent roast beef there. I have no affiliation with them, so I'm not doing them advertising. But I'm just an honest person. That's my opinion. Right. So, but anyways, they have sort of like, I remember the river when it was loaded full of logs for mass eons. I got to fish it, and that's why it was so incredible. It was way better fishing then than what you could ever find now. I went into massive bays and creeks where these fish never saw a human ever. How would you like to be able to catch over 30 muskies in a day and quite often catching between 15 to over 25 in a day's time? Quite often. How would you like that? Or giant bass one after another over 6 pounds, some over 7, some even over 8. If you right? How in Canadian waters? Can you imagine that? And like stringers of them and things like this. This river used to sort of contain this sort of availability because no humans were fishing it, almost zero, and the people that were not sort of really high advanced anglers. Like they didn't have Roland Martin work in the area, sort of thing, right? So I mean, this place was sort of like astonishing back in the day. There was way more sort of, when you would go down, to give you a bit of a historic fact of how much our waters have changed and the pollution is affecting and the stupidity and the things that we do. When I was a kid, there was no zebra mussels in here yet or any of these sorts of things. This water was very murky and much, much darker, much more tannic stained and things like this. And you would go down in the back of sort of this Parliament buildings here and things, and you could go along. When you would throw a lure in the water, literally thousands of minnows would jump up everywhere, and I mean everywhere, and dozens of species, like all kinds of weird things, from wild big giant golden shiners that I would catch there with tiny little dough balls and sort of things like that. I'd get a few dozen of them, and then I'd use them for these giant bass and muskies and stuff. I was doing like Florida fishing techniques in here from the 60s, 70s, all the way through the different eras, this sort of thing, right? So I used a lot of weird stuff that nobody else would sort of do like that, and you'd catch a lot of giant fish from doing all these sorts of unusual sort of things, right? But that's so common that sort of, and when you would, in the canal systems, it was completely no weeds in it whatsoever, all dark brown sort of water, right? And there was literally, you could not lay a bait down in the water anywhere there without disturbing piles of minnows, and for that your bait wouldn't even hit the bottom and you'd already have a carp on pretty well. Yeah, quite often caught over 100 carp in a day's time. Could you imagine? People would dream of this, like the sort of all the gang out there from old Tim Paisley or things like that. You know, all this sort of Maddox and all the gang. I mean, these guys would kill to have gotten the fishing that I got for massive decades in these sort of regions here. And this was average, like 50, 7,500 fish every single day, all over the place. And this is sort of like, so, but But then the zebra mussels came. They started clearing up the water. All of a sudden, within seemingly 15 minutes, now you could go down there, you almost never see a minnow. It's like zero. And you can go through the whole canal, you see little pumps of the mirror in there, the odd ones will get in. But I mean, they're in such low, like massively thousands of percentages lower than previous, right? And previous, it was mostly all smallmouth bass through that sort of system up in there, and sort of a 5 zillion carp because they had no predators much or anything like that, and sort of thing like that, and very few largemouth bass because there wasn't sort of the right sort of habitat for them. They almost very few of them that would get in. The odd one would get in from the Ottawa River or from the Upper Rideau, but in between, they just wasn't great habitat for them. So unless it was around the old Dow's Lakes sort of docks or things like that, there was a few marshy bays. You'd get the odd ones in there and different stuff. But generally speaking, it was loaded full of rock bass, sort of things like that, tons of smallmouth, sort of walleyes. You'd get weird fish, even sturgeon occasionally would go in there, gar, moon eyes, drum, all these kinds of stuff. I had to laugh. These scientists were all shocked that they got some drum in the river. I got pictures, all kinds of them. I even got one on film recently in the canal that I was goofing around, sort of thing like this, and all along this sort of system like that. But there's a lot of sort of fish that sort of can get up through our systems, right? But this was the thing is when they had all this logging, it prevented people from being in big numbers on the river. It prevented because they'd smash into sunken logs every 2 seconds. There was zillions of deadheads, right? And there was, back then, there was some weird stuff you would see in the river way more so than today. I haven't had any strange sighting of any odd anomaly in that river for quite some time. But actually, I saw a local report. Somebody actually saw the Ottawa River monster with some people. These guys were jet skiers or something. And they mentioned that they all started following this weird thing that was making a gigantic sort of waves through the water, and they all started circling around it and looking at it, and the thing kept going, and it was like monstrosity size, whatever it was. So there's a lot of sort of interesting stories in there, including some weird run-ins that I cover in the books and stuff like that. But back then, this was the difference. And once these zebra mussels and they started building up more in the city, polluting more, all these sorts of things like this, these things instantly within years you started seeing the weeds growing up. All of a sudden the canal and all the waters, the Ottawa River, started getting way clearer, way more weeds going on it, things like this. Now all of a sudden the predators can now see all these minnows quite easily, sort of stuff. So they started nailing into them and that. Now there is sections of the river that has been affected, and there's 10 zillion minnows there, so it's not all doom and gloom. And in fact, they've netted in some areas and caught in the most per poundage, like of a square acre sort of area of any sort of catches on Earth, nearly, sort of thing like that. So some areas still have a lot of it, but they're not even remotely close to what historic numbers of some of them. Back in the day, I was lucky. I got to fish the greatest sort of body of water that ever sort of was ever around. And I fish, like I said, massive hundreds of lake monsters sort of lakes and thousands of lakes over my lifetime, right? So and been all over this sort of thing like that. So I got to see tons of amazing fishing all over the place. But when it would come to Canadian waters, of sort of the only place on Earth in a day's time that you could go around, catch a monster walleye, a few of them over 10 pounds, then you could zoop over to another place and all of a sudden release a 50-some inch muskie, occasionally 60-some plus inch muskies, gazillions of 40-some plus inch muskies, and this sort of thing. A giant pike occasionally up to 30 pounds, that I pulled out too, that was exactly just over 30 pounds, but a few I live released, it might have been even a few sort of pounds more. And there's been other ones caught by other locals around there occasionally. I saw a 28-pound one caught by some guy, and a few that they're quite rare, like because of our sort of area and the more warmth and this things like that, it's much harder for them to achieve that size. So only the odd sort of Goliath Titan fluke one will make it that big. But a big one typically in the river is like you know, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, that's a big, decent sort of fish. And sort of like, you'll definitely get the nods. And at almost any pike tournament, you're going to sort of win with a 10 to 15 pound pike, a vast majority of the time in our sort of region in this sort of river, sort of, and quite often way less than that, 7, 6 pounds, sometimes 5 pounds, even if you, the odd rare time if the fishing was really slow and that sort of thing. But this is how much it changed, and this is a really warning to people. We do a lot of foolish things. Those, as for instance, these silver carp, once they get in the Great Lakes, I mean, you wouldn't believe. I saw this Texas tournament where these locals didn't even realize that these fish were in their lake barely. And these guys kept coming in with massive tons per day in nets. And I mean, tons. And they're sort of, they jump all over the place, smash into people and stuff like this. To me, I'd know how to hunt these sort of things because they're plankton like feeders. I used to do experiments on sort of paddlefish when I was in the States. I started trying to experiment because they said they wouldn't bite on sort of stuff. They'd get you to try and snag them and stuff. But I started experimenting with these reinforced sort of smaller crappie jigs, sort of things like that, to try and mimic sort of a tiny sort of like a blob of sort of zooplankton sort of stuff that they would suck up, right? And things like that. I did a lot of sort of weird experiments even as a little kid through ice fishing, all these kinds of stuff, and that sort of thing. But I saw so many changes over the ages from these sort of mysterious, weird things that you would see in the river before when it was nice and quiet. There was no sort of boats like that. There was a lot of weird stuff in there. It's just really weird, you know. But then it now is sort of like it's the river. There's you see 10 zillion boats going up and down it every second. All these places that I used to fish in these virgin bays that sounded like they were Bigfoot country. You'd hear in the background like ooh, like you'd hear all these crazy weird animal sounds in the back because they never saw a human before. This is how rare. Nobody was going in these sorts of places, right? So every sort of fish, especially if you're a skilled angler and you're using high quality sorts of equipment and baits, right? These fish went insane. I mean, it was crazy sort of stuff, right? So it was the most enjoyable sort of fishing in the world. It was fun to guide out people and things like that. I even guided out sort of some famous hockey players and different things like that, and sort of it was absolutely just the most sort of a great sort of system, and it still is. It has tons of fishing and things like that, and I still catch monsters out of it and these sort of things. But it's nothing remotely like compared to because now you go in these sort of bays, they've been taken over by sort of people that make camping areas and them cutting things out of them and all this kind of stuff. So it's sort of way more sort of used, right? So and this and garbage all over the place and people throwing in all their sorts of stuff like this, and sadly with our sort of these zebra mussels and all these different things, they've certainly caused a lot of havoc in a lot of sort of areas. I noticed even too in the St. Lawrence River that when we used to go to sort of these bays, you would see I'd bring people there with me and they couldn't believe it, like massively a whole bay golden colored full of carp. You could barely see the water because it's like loaded with literally thousands of giant carp. So you got one on your line every second, like monsters after monsters after monsters, right? And then I went back not that massively long ago with this lady, and we went out driving along it there, and we went to all those bays, didn't even spot one single fish up on the surface. Yet it's the same sort of time of year and things like that. And we went and things like this. So we finally found a few in this small bay, but you could see in the crystal clear water with the previous when you would go to these sort of things, you would go into the water and look down. You could barely just see a little bit into the water. These zebra mussels have cleared it up so much that now you can see a dime down, like, 30 feet down in the water sort of idea. So, I mean, these things have affected sort of a lot of different species. Now, certain areas of the river and the lakes and stuff, they haven't been affected as much because there might be like a lot of sort of dredging and local traffic and all kinds of weird stuff that goes on there that keeps it all muddied and sort of stuff like this. So then the same sort of habitat is being created for them them, but just in a smaller zone area. So in some areas, they're still highly populated, right? But in other areas, they have went down in numbers and things like that. So just keep these sort of things in mind that we don't want these fish being ghosts of the past. There's already all kinds of extinct species like the Arizona pupfish, all because these idiots there, they wanted to pump water for the city, and so they got greedy and they started pumping down, and of course killed these pupfish, right? Sort of stuff like that. And all these things that we do, we've made a lot of ghosts already, right? And especially in animals, from dinosaurs that were living still amongst us up till hundreds of years ago, and except for our foolishness, we sort of kept hunting them out and wrecked their habitat until there's nothing left, right? So keep these things in mind. We're making ghosts, right? So yes, ghosts exist. Sadly, they do. But that'll give you an idea about things that sort of changed over the ages. But it's very different now. This sort of river, right? Like I mean, but next we'll go about the Chateau Laurier Hotel. Back in the day, this place was haunted by a real werewolf to a young maid-looking girl, including a large fat man seemingly wandering the halls looking for chow. Right? So this place has had a lot of sort of weird stories. I met this character that used to work in there way back in the 60s and 50s. He said, and he told me this wild story about this giant rat. And he said that there was giant rats that lived underneath it, but he claimed that this rat was like seriously the size of a decent sized terrier on it. This sort of thing, right? And he said that it looked vicious and it would stare at him sometimes when he'd be having to clean around down in this basement area and stuff like that, right? And this lady that was a maid there, that I went on a few sort of dates with sort of when I was younger, she told me this interesting story about this sort of lady that she was working with, and that she saw that when she was cleaning one of the rooms, she saw this young lady there, and she was sort of like invisible, almost like she could see right through her, but her face was like really sort of like a pretty little sort of face to her, and looked like a very young girl to be a maid, but that's what she looked like. She was in some kind of maid-like sort of clothing, right? And sort of thing like that. And another person that psychic I was telling you about, he sort of knew some sort of a couple of ladies that sort of worked in there as well, and he was sort of helping one of them to do some things after her shift. And when he was waiting for around there, he saw this sort of this little girl that sort of walked from one sort of room that was open, and then sort of seemingly went right through the other side of the other sort of room, like without the door opening, right? So it freaked the heck right out of him. Sort of thing like that. So very, very interesting. But here's what this werewolf guy almost looked like. One of the sightings my relative told me about, the guy had apparently, he got all wasted and he had somehow mooched or stole some guy's top hat. So he went up there and he was flashing at an ancient relative of Trudeau up in the apartment buildings after, and he ripped off his clothes and started howling with the top hat on, right? So this guy was wild, but that's what he kind of looked like. He actually had like this furry sort of face with this big sort of beak on him, but the guy would sort of not really like hurt anybody or bite them, but he would sort of get wasted and bum bourbon and gin and different things from these guys at the Chateau Laurier. Right? So, absolutely fascinating, but I mean, very interesting sort of thing. But so maybe he was turning into a werewolf like this guy here in ancient times, right, sort of thing. But absolutely bizarre. But the chateau doesn't look like that now. It's sort of very different. The parking's sort of different, and all those sort of things like that. So uh, right now in that area, there's sort of like, you can see where that bridge is there going across. The parking lot doesn't sort of exist there like that anymore. But back in the day, there was actually a parking lot in the front that they had, and you would go underground and sort of stuff. There was a lot of differences. They've changed it quite a few times over the years, but very interesting. It was, so. Here, local ghosts here, there's been different parliamentary sort of ghosts have been seen in there quite a few times. And you can see this creepy picture here. Space aliens have been seen there, including a really bizarre sort of one that I got this story from back in the 80s. I don't know if it might have something to do. It was like maybe early 80s or late 70s. I'm trying to think now. Yeah, no, I guess it would have been probably late 70s. Yeah, I don't even think it had turned the 80s yet. But I got this crazy story about that there was all these wackos down at the sort of Parliament building, and apparently there was a gang of these Hare Krishnas that were upset about something, right? So they went up there and they were Hare Krishna, and they were jumping around with these sort of pink robes and the tambourines and all this sort of stuff, right? So they're leaping around, and we have this thing, this eternal flame there, right? And so this guy, a buddy of mine, he wanted to see like all this craziness, right? So he thought it was funny, and he was drinking downtown at the time. At some old trashy bar there, Lafayette, I think it was, or one of those, right? So, but anyways, he's sort of one of those crazy wild bars that we had back in the day. Yeah, I think it still exists or stuff like that. It's actually a pretty wild place. I heard even Bieber went in there. So, but anyways, very entertaining. You can get a cheap quart of beer and that sort of thing. But it was considered like a wild sort of a place, right? But anyways, he was partying from one of those sort of things, and he decided to see these Hare Krishnas because he just wanted some entertainment. And I would have gladly went myself too. I would have loved to see this. But anyway, so he's up there, and the Hare Krishnas are leaping around. And he said that these weird sort of wackos came with white robes, and they sort of looked like the Ku Klux Klan, and they all sort of got around this sort of the sort of eternal flame thing, and they got down on their knees and started like waving their hands and singing some weird sort of phrases in French, because he's not French at all, so he didn't understand any of the words. So was that some kind of early cult like Bloc Québécois meeting, possibly, or some early guys, waving in the magic for Trudeau, or one of those? I don't know, but anyways, absolutely fascinating. But really sort of a weird sort of thing. But anyways, a lot of people have been down there, and a lot of sort of strange things have been seen inside the Parliament buildings over the years. Odd ghostly reports from staff and different things like that. We've had a lot of things there. We had a nut that tried to shoot the people in the Parliament and stuff like that, and all kinds of things. So Maud saw flying saucers around here. They were all exactly, and this is probably like the picture of what it would have looked like back when she saw it, right? Sort of things like this, because I believe it was like 1903, I think it is, and she was sort of down over way over left here or someplace, and she was coming back from this shindig, and there was these silver sort of balls all circled around this sort of spot, right? So I mean, maybe they were sort of right. That would explain a lot of the parliamentary decisions over the years. Absolutely. So, like I said, I show you in the alien shows for sure aliens exist of some sort. Whether they're human aliens that are flying up in flying saucers and screwing with us from the skies, or whether they really are aliens, it doesn't matter. Somebody flies things up there and likes to sort of seemingly has interest in all of our sort of parliamentary government, sort of anything big, weird buildings, things like that. They seemingly like to hang around spots like that. It's very interesting. But anyways, just the Parliament building sure has had a lot of sort of weird sort of things about it. I hear this, the Lord Elgin Hotel, odd things have happened there, from TVs turned upside down to older lady told me about a maid she could see through. when I was a kid, my mother told me about this, that it was haunted in there, right? And she had met this sort of couple where they were in there and their sort of TV somehow flipped around. So, like, they were sitting there and the TV actually, when they came back, was flipped actually right around, sort of thing like that. I mean, absolutely bizarre. And there was another sort of tale like that where apparently some TV actually got unbolted and sort of like flipped right, sort of like, so this was their sort of TV, right? But this was actually like bolted right in because it's, I guess, these sort of hotels when they don't want you scoffing it probably or something. So somehow they had it sort of like grounded right in there pretty good. And somehow this thing with them just going a little bit flipped right around and sort of was then upside down and things like that, right? And my mother told me that there was some kind of a maid and things like that that would be seen around there, and a couple others, sort of this ghostly old man with a top hat that would sort of walk up and down the hallways and things like that. And she'd heard some stories because she used to like going there all the time, and she'd eat in that restaurant, and these old ladies would be sitting there and they'd start talking to her. My mother was one of those sorts people would instantly gravitate to her and start talking to her, sort of like. So and she was just so friendly and sort of like that, that she looked so honest that people would sort of right away sort of home into her. And she'd collect these sort of stories from her. She'd always ask them, you ever hear of it, right? And sort of thing like this. But absolutely, like, it's a pretty sort of strange hotel there where there's been a lot of sort of poltergeisty, like, sort of more sort of phenomena. But I was there actually with her once, and this old lady sort of was sitting there, and she said that I don't like it in this place because my mother was saying it's so beautiful and stuff, and she was complaining about sort of these biscuits that they were giving her with her tea, that she didn't like them for some reason. Right? So, but anyway, she was saying that she didn't like it there either, that it creeped her out. She had stayed there before, and she said that she saw this girl dressed in some kind of weird sort of old sort of stuff from probably like the 1800s, it looked like to her, and she walked right through the sort of door. So, yeah, absolutely. And I could see it right on her faces, even though I was a little kid. I still could see that, yeah, you know what I mean? There was something like to this. Like, I mean, she looked like she really sort of 100% believed that shit. So, like, I mean, I completely believed her and sort of things like that. So, I mean, it's certainly definitely one of our more haunted sort of areas around in the sort of city. Uh, like this. The Courtyard restaurant, I don't have a picture of it here, but I've eaten there before, and I had heard stories from some of the staff there and things like that about that. Yeah, it's true that there's a ghost in there. Workers have heard like footsteps behind them moaning, and sometimes they see this odd sort of like spectral female that you can see through her, sort of like she's typically in white, and you can see her in the second floor window, and she's looking down at you and stuff like that. And so it's an interesting sort of spot, and very nice around there. Anyways, I've seen some pretty entertaining things over the years. It's been different things in that area that's all around there, and right near there, actually, there's sort of some others. There's another building around there, the old sort of what's the heck's the name of that? Oh my goodness, there's another sort of place there at the edge of that sort of castle thing that also is supposed to be haunted around the same sort of square area. That I picked up a story, and I don't even remember what they saw. It's so long ago, but some other building right near there has had a sort of a couple of sort of odd sort of things. Apparently, those went on it at this right near it or something, right? So maybe it's the same ghost or something, but very interesting. Just another sort of a weird one out here. Here, the Duford House was moved and changed into a museum. said to be haunted by a girl who moves dolls and other objects around, located on the old Montreal Road area in Cumberland and that. So absolutely interesting. There's a farm sort of around there that you can sort of look out and check a bunch of things, and it's haunted too. I'd forgotten to put that one in there, but it's a farm that's right around that sort of area, and it's one of the older sort of establishments, and there's you can take like even hay rides sort of things there. Apparently they do different things throughout the season sort of idea, and it's like an historic little spot. I can't think of the darn name of it. I was only out there once, and I had never even heard of the spot before, even though I drove by it many times. I didn't even notice it. Look, when I'm fishing, man, it's like my mind's on that sort of. I'm not sort of sightseeing for those parts, but next here, this one here, the Manitic Mill. I actually saw something really strange here, and I mean really strange. But I got an amazing story for you. Maybe this guy's out there if he ever happens to, by fluke in a million, catch my show. I was with this old buddy of mine that sadly passed on. Now he had sort of sadly died out in an accident out in BC and things. But we were really good fishing buddies, and we'd go out and fish all over the place. And I brought him up to sort of the Manitic Mill there, and I liked hunting for these giant suckers that are in there. I just love sort of unusual sort of species. And so they had these, red horse suckers of different sorts and things like that. And so we were fishing for these sort of things like that, and it was in the evening, sort of, and we were going to stay into the night and keep hunting them around over this bridge and things like that, and this sort of thing. But we were fishing along down below, sort of, you can't see it, but below there's actually gravel past the sort of mill area, and sort of there's this gravelly sort of area along there, right, like along the bank, and we go down there and we're casting along and things like this, and this little family comes down. This guy, this father, and he's got his 2-year-old little boy with him, and it's his first time fishing, right? So the father had made out his cast like this, and he was going to now take the kid to sort of fling this out like this, and he gets snagged. So now he's all fighting with the snag like this. So the kid's there, and he's hey, like this, and he's got his little bobber with him, and he had a little sort of piece of a worm on the hook there, right, like this. And then he's waving it over the water, and I said, yeah, that's it. I said, all you got to do is just lower it into the water. Just put it in the water. Just put your rod down like this. So he puts it down. You see, all of a sudden, the bobber start to shake. And I said, yank, you got one like this, right? So he yanks, he freaks right out. He lifts up in the air, and he's got this little rock bass on him, right? Just a tiny little small rock bass, maybe about half a pound sort of on him, and this sort of thing. And he's wiggling, and the kid's screaming and freaking out like this, and his father's still trying to get this snag out. And I said, way to go, congratulations, like this, like that. And I said to the father, I said, here, if you want, I can try and get that snag out for you. I'm quite good at that. And I said, here, maybe we can get a picture with you and your son with this sort of his first fish. He caught it on his first cast. Congratulations, right? So I'm talking to him like this. The kid's still screaming, and he's waving the rock bass over the water. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, this muskie comes flying out of the water, right? He wasn't a monster, but he still is a muskie here. He comes flying out of the water and nails right into this rock bass that's hanging at least about 2.5 feet above the surface from it, maybe possibly 3 feet, somewhere in this sort of range. And he comes flying out, nails into it. The kid screams and goes, like this. So the kid was scared, and he sort of turned, and because he did that, now he's sort of propelling his rod this way, sort of to the left, more onto the bank, and sort of this helped the muskie keep sort of flying with it. So the muskie lands right on the kid's friggin' feet, man. Like this. So this kid even outdid me with a weird sort of catch like this, because, I mean, for your first cast ever, you're 2 years old, you get it on your first cast, and then catch a muskie on the same cast, then that's a fantastic sort of on your first go, right? That's pretty hard to beat. So anyways, I was just totally thrilled by this. I just thought this was most hilarious. So the kid's freaking out and this sort of stuff like this. And then the father sort of like couldn't believe this. So as far as I can remember, I tried to get pictures of them or what have you of this. And then sort of they were all excited, and then they finally sort of went off. And I'm sure he was trying to sort of tell sort of these, everybody. Hopefully the pictures showed up for them or whatever it was. I can't even remember if we were, because I remember just wanting to take the picture, but I don't actually remember sort of doing so, right? So I was just so into that part of it. But anyways, one way or the other, if somebody's ever told you a story about this kid that on his first cast, his first fishing trip, gets a rock bass and a muskie on the same cast, and at the Manitic Mill, he's actually telling you the truth. So it was one of the most coolest sort of things I've ever sort of ran across. I've had a lot of these sorts of things happen to us in boats. You got the fish laying on the side, and I actually got on film recently. There, I'll have it on my documentary where I'm reeling in this big smallmouth bass, and a giant muskie nailed it right in the middle of it while I was grabbing with him, and I saved the smallmouth bass's life. So, but anyways, a sort of thing like that, but. But for a sort of thing like that on your first sort of dry like that and stuff like that, so hopefully the young fellow's still fishing. He's got the luck. So great stuff. But anyways, when they left and things like that, we decided to go back up on the bridge, and we're just walking around and things like this. And you see that window on the far sort of the rightest sort of side of the screen at the top. This weird sort of light appeared in it, but it was weird. It didn't look like a sort of a normal, a normal light. Like it didn't look like a sort of one you would turn on in a room, and it had a different sort of aura to it. And I said, what the hell is that? I said, look at that. I said, there's a weird light. All of a sudden you start seeing the shadow, and this girl was looking down at us, and she had sort of a little bit of white on the top sort of part, and her face was really palish. Then you saw this sort of other shadow of some seemingly maybe like an adult person or something, but you couldn't really see them. There was just a bit on the sides. So they kept looking, and you got this weird aura up of it, and then all of a sudden she sort of pulled back and she was gone. But I couldn't even tell if she just dematerialized or did she sort of walk backwards a little bit. It was weird, sort of thing like that. And then the light sort of flickered down, and then there was no light again. So I'm battling with this big friggin' sucker later on, and I'm down at the bank like this, and then I could see off in the distance the light come back in, and my buddy was still up there. He's, because he had a couple of nibbles on it, and he still wanted to stay with it, and I didn't need him to let him from here or anything, right? So no big deal there. And so he's doing his thing, and the thing comes on, and he said that he saw some kind of lady and some weird dude, and they were sort of staring down at him, sort of like this, right? So there's some kind of thing, and I found out later that there used to be some family that lived up there, and some people say that it's haunted. So that's what we probably saw, because, I mean, where would these carry, why would anybody, this place was already shut down for 5 million, it's not being run by anybody. So at least not that I'm aware of anyways, right? So, I mean, it was an extremely weird experience, but I mean, I didn't get to see all of them, but I did see with him at first, the girl, sort of some young looking girl, she didn't look very old, and quite pale with weird sort of whitish sort of dress possibly of some sort on, and some darkish shadow that looked bigger, so probably like an adult that was making a shadow this sort of way in the window, right? So absolutely bizarre, one of the sort of weirdest sort of things, but whatever it was extremely sort of interesting that, I mean, I suppose maybe some fluke in a million that some people were paid to sort of caretake there and clean it once in a blue moon and sort of thing like that. But I mean, why would they behave like that? And how do they have such weird sort of ghostly looking clothing on? I mean, it's a bit out there, right? And why does their light sort of fade on for just a little bit and then shut off? Why would they? I mean, if you were the cleaners, right? Okay, so they already did that. Then their light went away. Then I don't even know how long ago that was. Like after that, maybe an hour or two or something, like whatever. But it was later on in the evening that when this had occurred again the next time. But the thing is that when you saw the light again, the same sort of weird sort of thing to it. Why would they sit in the dark in between these two spells, right? So I mean, these things you see, I'm illogical. Like, I mean, I would prefer to believe that it was a caretaker group. I don't want to see any ghosts, but I mean, still, I don't have an explanation for it, right? So I mean, that's the only sort of thing I can sort of think of like that. I hear the sort of war museum there. People had weird sort of things here, footsteps behind them, workers and things like that. And I've never met anybody personally that's ever seen anything out of there and that. And I was around it. I mean, I didn't, it's one of those ones, probably maybe the odd sort of items they have in there may have some kind of sort of weird residual sort of stuff to them or something like that. That's what they claim, these ghostly people that are experts on this sort of stuff, that possibly certain items might have sort of some kind of things still them to them. I suppose it's possible. Here, the Reno Falls, besides haunting of giant fish to werewolf sightings by old Rockcliffe Park, there's a Rockcliffe Point Park where and the park and this place called Rockland Point where you can look out over, and quite often in the 1700s people used to see werewolves all the time around there. It was actually in quite a few older papers and things like this, so absolutely fascinating, but very interesting. But this electric station here, there was this guy that was around there, and I met these fishermen, and they told me this weird story. Back in the day, they used to allow us to go down there, and it was the greatest fishing ever. I mean, you'd catch like giant walleyes, a giant muskie the next cast, a giant sauger, a quillback carp sucker, a sturgeon, a huge catfish, and eel, all in the same afternoon, and then maybe a 4 foot plus gar or even a 5 foot sort of one, like all kinds of weird sort of creatures that would be sort of coming in and out of there every 2 seconds of the day, and things like that, way back in the earlier sort of times like this when they had the logging and all that sort of stuff. But now they've wrecked it all. Instead of actually building stairways down there so people could investigate down at the bottom and maybe make it convenient for fishermen that like to go down there and that sort of thing, instead they block it all off on people for no reason. There was not one person ever died there for going over those falls for 100+ years of walking down there going fishing. There's a cliff on the side. Yeah, it's a little bit tricky and dangerous, but not one single person ever croaked from doing it. Not that I know of, right? So, I mean, there was actually some poor fisherman that was sort of murdered around there, and there was a guy that sort of reeled in a person's hand one time out of there. So there's some creepy stuff, but nevertheless, like, I mean, right there you can see up at the sort of a top area, all they had to do was build a sort of an angular sort of stairs that would go down, right, that are steel. And then once you're down at the bottom, it's all normal and sort of the people can walk around. And it's a very nice touristic sort of a spot, right? So a sort of thing like that. But instead, they sort of got rid of all that. But these guys had saw this weird sort of woman that they thought was really weird. They were out night fishing there, and there's this creepy building, the old hydro sort of building around on this side of it. And they were telling me this wild sort of story about this lady that sort of her booty sort of was lighting up like as if it was glowing and stuff like this. And it looked like she was sweeping out in front of sort of the building. They were fishing on the side of it, and they could see her, and she was sort of sweeping, but it looked like she was glowing. And they said that she had quite a big rump on her. So I like the idea that I guess it sounds good anyway. I wish I had seen it, but nothing wrong with a big booty. but all kidding aside, though, seriously, absolutely fascinating. So this Reno Falls has got a lot of weird stuff, from the odd sea monster report to people being yanked over by muskies the size of King Kong, and all kinds of stuff. Eh? So I mean, it's interesting, giant rats occasionally, and all kinds of weird stuff. So very entertaining sort of area for sure. But it's a shame now. It's like I said, they sort of wrecked a lot of the stuff that used to be available to people, right? Here, the Appleton Mill, what a beautiful area to go fishing. I mean, just absolutely wonderful. When I was a kid, I'd go there sort of all the time, man, and I'd do two things at the same day. First, I'd go fly fish and normal with this old Alcedo Micron spinning reel, and I would cast right in these little pools, and I'd catch these fall fish, and then I'd use them for bait, for these giant smallmouth and sort of stuff like this. And you'd catch, and they were so fun. I mean, you'd hook them and they jump like a tarpon. They look just like a little miniature tarpon, sort of thing like that. But they had this mill there, and you get these floods and these weird stuff like that. But there was this sort of fire and all this damage, and the mill got sort of destroyed, and things like that got swept away, and different things happened to it. But parts of the structure are still around, and different things. But there's been people that have seen sort of like women dancing sort of around it and stuff like that late at night, where they sort of glow and things like that. I've never personally seen, but I mean, there's certainly some great fishing and things around there, but. I've collected these stories over the years from different sort of third-party sources, and one direct party of stating that they saw some weird sort of light flickering up in the thing. So it's sort of weird, but whatever is very possible, because there was some people apparently that had died in this sort of event here, and it's quite possible that they sort of inhabited sort of thing, right? But very interesting, beautiful place. Anyways, sort of the Mississippi River is like an extraordinary sort of back in the day of fishery. It's one of the few places in Ontario that is consistently, from time to time, will produce a 7 pound plus smallmouth out of it. Right? I took several out of there. There was a guy on the same weekend. I got this gigantic monster, a 7.3 smallmouth, out of there. And on the same weekend, another guy got one, actually a 7.10 or some damn thing, out of there with a piece of bacon in the same area. So absolutely, but the guy just had a hook and a piece of bacon, with just like a raw sort of bacon, and he was twitching along like you would like a sort of working plastic worms and things, right? Sort of like you'd work a slug over once like that, right? So that sort of idea. And he nailed into this sort of monster and stuff like that. And so, absolutely, one of the few bodies of water where there's sort of it's consistently every so many years. A 7 pound plus monster or a smallmouth will appear out of it from time to time. So there's a seemingly bigger smallmouth even in there than there is largemouth. But anyways, it's sort of they're not sort of like something you couldn't go and get massive limits of them and things like that. But there's some spread out in amongst them, right? Sort of thing like that. But very interesting sort of fishery, and it's neat too because it's one of the few places in the world where the same river meets each other. So the Mississippi River pours where it's a totally different kind of a river. In that section, it's more geologically young, and you have fall fish and a lot of more minnow-like species, a little bit of walleyes and different stuff like that, and different things, smallmouth bass and this sort of stuff. But then when it pours into the other sort of Mississippi part of it, that's all the eutrophic part, and it's a lot sort of more like sort of the Rita River system. It's quite eutrophic, and quite a bit more of a sort of a mixture sort of fishery of largemouth, smallmouth, walleye, pike, and sort of things like that, right? But excellent pike fishing too. Quite often you'd catch like 75, 80, sometimes over 100 in a day's time using Sarah spooks or things like that. I mean, just absolutely amazing sort of fun fishing. I have no idea what it's like nowadays. I've not been there in many moons, but if you happen to be up in that region and you want to hit a different sort of location, it's certainly be definitely worth checking out. Yeah, even if you don't catch much, at least some views very interesting. Uh, Local goes through the Vanier Cemetery, Beechwood Cemetery, along with a convent across the road, and some other properties along its edge all have stories of ghosts or screaming sounds, right? So absolutely, pretty weird there. I'll tell you, there a bit about a sort of witch that was seen in there, sort of stuff. But I mean, there was this sort of a weird sort of what is the name of that place? It's along the cemetery. It's some kind of weird sort of Catholic like sort of thing, like a monastery like place or whatever, right? But it's supposed to be haunted too. And there was this secret sort of barracks that was hidden in there, a secret sort of a place that you could go underground, and wild sort of teenagers would have giant parties in it, right? And it was actually like hidden underneath a bush, and it's an actual underground system in there. So I mean, absolutely fascinating. But I mean, when I was a kid, even things like this, sometimes we'd go down and we'd go fishing down at this place called the Pits, and there was stories around there of people that would see some sort of weird girl that was sort of transparent, that seemingly she was jumping into the sort of lake, and the thought was that possibly she was some kind of girl that might have, yeah, possibly drowned there at one point or another or something like that. But they used to have wild sort of things going on there, and sometimes then of course some sort of people would come and want to interfere with the entertainment and clean the kids out. So of course then the kids would all bolt for the hills wanting to escape these people that want to come and wreck your entertainment. If you get the idea, right? So then these kids would scurry off fast, and a lot of them would sort of bolt through this sort of a cemetery and things like that. And some of them would get the heck scared out of them in the middle of the night of hearing this sort of screaming or moaning. And there was some kind of wild sort of ghostly drunk that was hiding out in the bushes there. He was like a Bigfoot drunk werewolf man sort of idea. They said he was pretty sort of like smelly and hairy sort of a dude, but he looked like a ghost that would sort of scream and wander and patrol around the sort of edges of this sort of Beechwood Cemetery, right? So absolutely sort of really weird. But this old sort of Italian guy that was a barber and stuff like this, he actually I put this in the second book about, he had this sort of run-in with these three Black Panthers, and there was this guy that was living behind him that said that he was walking along with this sort of dog, and his dog started barking, and there's this nun place there, and this sort of ghostly sort of nun looked like he could see her, and she was walking along, but she looked like you could see through her. So that old nun's area that's right across from the cemetery is supposedly haunted as well, with some kind of possible nun that floats around. It's a pretty creepy area. It's true, but I mean, just absolutely sort of like. But sometimes you can go by. I've heard this. This is really weird, that they play music at night in this cemetery for some strange reason. And I've heard these different rumors that the reason they played them was seemingly to sort of get rid of maybe possibly these ghosts. Sort of idea, like some kind of reasoning, or maybe to soothe them or something like. But whatever reason, these guys actually play sort of music out in the woods there. Whoever does it, I don't know if it's the cemetery people or whatever. But it's a pretty strange place. So quite interesting. Anyways, just another sort of a weird sort of ghostly like phenomena or city that's a bit out there. Here at the Vanier Blake Apartments, strange cult that worships a Charles Manson-like leader, and garbage seemingly along as well with a Grim Reaper apparition that looks like the Hampton Park in England photo below, taken of a Grim Reaper. Okay, so first off, we'll start off with this sort of Charles Manson cult. This is the weirdest thing ever in the near history of mankind that I have ran across, and I ran across this guy twice. So this guy was doing this gig for well over possibly 40 years. So I would like anybody on this earth to answer this sort of riddle. 1970s. You're going down the street, and there was a big sort of wild party going on. You're walking down, and you hear all the music and the stuff like this. All of a sudden, this character comes out, and I recognize one of the sort of people. And so I said, "Hey, man, what's happening?" Like this, oh, there's a big party. You want to come in? And like this. So, anyways, I go in there, and a huge gang, like about 20 some people in this. They had these big sort of apartments, and some of them where it was like 3 bedrooms, and you had a giant kitchen, so you could have like mobs of people in these sort of old apartments, right? And it was cheap sort of rental back in the day. And so anyways, we're partying on down and stuff like this, and this sort of thing, and decided after like probably about 3 hours of this, 4 hours of this, just to get some fresh air. So I decided to walk out and sort of just go out and have a smoke outside and just listen to entertainment. I could hear people screaming down the street, so I thought maybe there's some kind of wild couple having a fisticuff or something entertainment, right? So anyways, I decided to go down there, and then some others I started hearing following from behind, and so now there's like about 4 or 5 of us out there, and we all light up a smoke. We're just walking around, and all of a sudden, you go on the side of the sort of one of their openings. They got like a sort of an entrance to go into each sort of parking lot area, right? The all of a sudden you see this ladder, and it's way up, a giant ladder, like one of those huge ones that you would get. Like it's not a typical size; it was quite tall, like taller than the normal ones you would normally sort of you purchase them for somebody working on big large buildings or something like that, right? So behind this ladder there's a guy holding it, a guy going up the ladder with a pile of garbage in his arms while he's trying to climb up the ladder with his other arm. Meanwhile, at the top, there's a giant open window with a guy that looks exactly like Charles Manson, right? So the guy's up at the top like this, and he's waving to them. So then the guy keeps coming up. There's a lineup of people behind the guy that's balancing the sort of as the ladder for him. And so there's a gang in behind him lined up. So we decide not to freak them out or anything like this, and just sort of stay at the edge and watch this insanity, like what's going on. And I said, shh, like this, I started telling the others, like, here, just look, like this, right? So we're watching this. Finally, this first nut gets up there. There might have been others. Maybe we missed some of them as we go along. But anyways, this particular one, he was the first one we could see in the lineup. He gets up to the top, and then all of a sudden the guy releases his old arms and he starts bowing with the garbage to this garbage guy that looks like Charles Manson. So is that like some kind of handshake? Was that you're worshiping him? What are you doing here, right? And why are you doing this about now probably 2 o'clock in the morning, right? So now the guy hands to Charles Manson the garbage. The guy yanks it in, then all of a sudden returns back to him and gives him a 6-pack. Right? So then I said, what the, like this? I mean, my mind just like, what? Like, I mean, I've seen a lot of weird things already by that point, but I had never seen anything as strange as up to that point of that. Like, I mean, that's extremely, you got to admit, absolutely bizarre. So then he comes down. The guy vanishes off in the backyard through the sort of area there, and it gets dark again, so you couldn't see where he was going. The guy was gone with his 6-pack. Meanwhile, now a next guy is going up, and now the guy's holding for him the same thing, and he's got a pile of garbage. There was 3 ladies, including a strange kid that couldn't have been any more than about 11 or 12 years of age. So every one of these nuts went up this thing, bowed to this mighty sort of a garbage leader of some sort, right? And then they sort of got his 6-pack from him after handling him this garbage. So this guy, so anyways, that evening finally, when the last one went down, the guy, the Charles Manson guy, did the weirdest thing I've ever seen. He went, hallelujah, like this, and he screamed some kind of crazy thing, and he pushed with all his might the ladder, and it went flying backwards and actually landed on the other side of the wall and sort of bounced on it but stayed on it. So the guy then shut his window, and that was the end of it. Then the lights went off, right? So then I said, okay. I said, that's pretty wild. So I asked these characters that own this place, what the hell is going on? Have you ever seen this garbage man? And they said, "Oh yeah, we see him like this," and they were these sort of newfie characters, and they sort of so they said, "Yeah, we've seen them before and things like that," and they do that sometimes. He says nobody knows why they do it, but he said sometimes there's a big lineup of them. So I said, "Hey man," I said, "Listen, I gotta see this again. I gotta figure this out. This is like a mysterious sort of fascinating thing. I want to know, right? Like what kind of wacky gold is this, right?" So I tell my mother about this, and my mother loves sort of investigating cults and all that kind of stuff because she was all religious, so she wanted to have the weaponry against the cults by knowing what evil they might be up to. Sort of idea. So I tell her about this, and my grandmother, so they were convinced that somehow these guys must have been some wacky satanic cult of some sort, and maybe there's not garbage in there and they're handing something else to them, right? So all these different theories were being shot out every second. So the entertainment value for me was just magnificent. I just loved all this stuff, right? So I just couldn't believe because this guy looked exactly like Charles Manson. I mean, the same beard, about the same kind of size, with the same kind of look, and about the same everything very similar. So, anyways, I wasn't able to go by this area for a long time, and probably about a month later or something was the next time I was able to get past there. And lo and behold, I went and I asked them, and they said, "Oh yeah," they said he was just here. They said he's usually doing it. I think it was like Wednesday nights and Friday nights that he does this, right? So I said, "Oh man, I can't wait for this." So then I waited and parked out for this sort of thing, right, on this Friday night. And we got some beers and got a bit, I guess, S space there a little bit to watch this sort of entertainment. So, anyways, we get out there, we start walking along the edge, and we're watching this. And these crazy, this time there was like about 15 of these people. This crazy chick with almost no, she had a halter top that was so short, within 2 inches more, she might as well have been topless, right? This sort of stuff. So she gets up there and she's waving this right in front of this guy's this Charles Manson character sort of face doing the bow to him, and his head went nailed. He's the first time that he did this. He went down and sort of leaned his head right into her sort of, let's say, chestal area, I guess, just to thank her for great worshiping. Eventually, the most craziest stuff. So this kept occurring, like, so one after another, they kept bringing up more garbage. Some of it seemed to be like bottles of water, possibly empty bottles of water, like, or cans or things like that. But other things seemed to be like paper garbage and weird stuff like this from the shape of the stuff they were bringing in these big bags or had them wrapped up. So finally, this gang cleared out, and each time we'd give them a six-pack and stuff like this. So then I was all entertained by this. I wasn't able to go again for a while, and then I go back, and then they told me, "Oh, no, sorry." They said that somehow the guy had vanished, and it took them 10 zillion years to sort of get his stuff out of there because a lot of the stuff he jammed in there somehow through these windows, apparently you couldn't get through the door easily and stuff like this. So whatever he did to sort of jimmy his big windows on the side, he was able to sort of, I guess, get in a lot of garbage in there. So these people sort of chucked him out, I guess, of some sort. And then they sort of decided to sort of get rid of him, and then sort of, I guess, all this garbage they were stuck cleaning up for ages, right? So I never, that was the end of that, and I thought about it from time to time and said, "Holy mackerel, man, that's got to be the weirdest cult I've ever seen." And then massive years later, I'm over at this lady's place, and she lived in an apartment building and stuff like this, and I see, all of a sudden, I'm looking at the other apartment buildings that are across from it, and lo and behold, what do I see? I see something quite interesting. I see a ladder going up to the second sort of balcony, right? With a gang in the dark, the same thing, with now the same guy with the same Charles Manson beard, but this is now 30, probably 30 years plus later here, and now it's all gray, so now he's an old version of Charles Manson. So I was never entertained more than anything in the world to hear my action is back again, right? So every Friday night, this nutcase would have lineups of people come. They would come up struggling with this garbage and broken doors and all kinds of stuff, and this guy would fling it over his sort of balcony and then come back and give them a six-pack, and they would bow to him. Then I started seeing them. They were so crazy, these people, that he started recruiting local drunks that I know were drunks because she'd tell me about them, that they're always sort of trying to panhandle for booze and all that sort of stuff. So these drunks were now going to these recycling bins and stealing the recycling garbage out of it and now bringing it to their cult leader. So then this went on. I kept going by these shifts because when I come back from work, I had to go from this sort of one shift, and sometimes it was later at night that I'd be finishing. Those shift times, they change your shift every few months. So I was lucky for a few months. I got a lot of entertainment of this pretty well every Friday night. Coming back on this thing, I'd get to see this cult-like action. So I'd watch every bit of it. I was never sort of amused in my life. So I discussed this with her in different ones, saying, what on earth could they be up to? Like, what is this? And then I explained to them that I saw this cult back in the 70s. And how is this guy still alive? And why are these people never been heard of? Why do they not have, like, some kind of website here, right? Like, I mean, who wouldn't want to join a garbage man cult? I mean, it sounds like a good idea. So if I ever sort of wanted to start drinking beer and stuff like this, at least it'd be a great way to go. I could go buy a sort of a garbage dump and grab a bag of garbage and then bring it over to his worshipfulness here, and I got a six-pack, right? So it sounds like a pretty good kind of trade there. But all getting aside, though, like, so what was this guy sort of up to? But then all of a sudden, the same thing. The guy sort of just vanished, right? So I don't know, like, did he run off? Somebody claimed that he had died, but then others dispute this, right? But I had gotten this local information from walking around there and asking, hey, did you ever see that crazy guy with all this sort of stuff? The same thing with them. They actually had to bust the balcony was all messed up and stuff like this. They had to take the doors off these giant the doors and throw this garbage out this way because they couldn't get it through the doors. They said it was so packed it took them months to actually clear this whole thing out. And it was all out on their sort of backyard lawn. So this thing was loaded on their lawn all over the place to the ceiling of garbage from this cult guy. So what the hell? Because anybody explain this to me? I was like, why would some guy want, like, how would he make money more by giving them six-packs? Like, what is the purpose of this? And why were they bowing to him each time, right? And why? Yeah, you know what I mean? Do you not see how weird this is, right? So, like, still to this date, I have no explanation. I can't tell you, but out of all the strangest cult-like, weird, like, sort of things I've ever seen or heard of in my entire life, but I met a lot of them. I met once, there was this, actually, I'll tell you this hilarious story about sort of the Krishna, a buddy of mine, sort of ages ago, the Krishna, there was a gang of them, there was a lot more of them back in the city, back in the time, but this guy I knew, that I was working with, his brother actually got sort of kidnapped by these guys. He said that after they deprogrammed him, that what they did is he went into some kind of place here in Ottawa where they have this Hare Krishna sort of meeting or something. And he said that he started smelling this weird sort of mist in his head, and it was all getting smoggy and smoky in the room. And they kept playing these videos, Hare Krishna, Rama Hare, and all this kind of stuff, right? So they're going along. And he said he started getting dizzy and stuff like this. And then they kept trying to make him drink some kind of weird sort of concoction that they were making. Get a load of this. They they were given free vegetables from the garbage cans from the market. So they somehow had a deal with market vendors because the market vendors doesn't care. It's less garbage. He's got to pay for it because if you're a business, you have to pay after a certain amount. So the Hare Krishnas would take this sort of rotten lettuce and all this weird sort of stuff and make some kind of blender like food out of it. And then they would give it to them. So he's convinced that there was something in it, like some kind of drug-like sort of stuff or something, because all of a sudden, when he woke up, sort of, all of a sudden now he was in this sort of encampment somewhere of the Hare Krishnas, right? So his family spent a fortune sort of getting these investigators and all this sort of stuff, and they actually kidnapped him in a van in front of this Hare Krishna cult place, wherever it was. I don't remember. It was some kind of one of their bigwig sort of Hare Krishna places that they bring them to, right? So he actually sort of helped him escape, and then they deprogrammed him, and then this guy remembered all this and started talking about the weird sort of stuff that they did. So pretty out there, this sort of stuff, right? But I mean, absolutely, like I don't know, man. That's pretty strange, right? Yeah, you got to admit. But very interesting, though. Anyway, it's like, I mean, and all kinds of stuff like that. Like, I mean, there's so many of these. Like, I mean, it's quite sort of interesting. But here I'll go on. There I won't go on much more about that. Here we'll go on to some more ghosts. There was this was the Ottawa Laurier's house, Chapel Laurier area. This was early Prime Minister's home. Jean Guy and many theorized Truglo may be into the occult, as our early Prime Ministers was said to do occult practices here. So that could explain some of these things, right? But different things have been heard in there, like the piano will play by itself. People have seen his pictures, sort of the eyes move on it and stuff like that. Footsteps following around. I've been in it a few times, and my psychic buddy had a sort of a strange run-in with some kind of weird thing in there that he said it creeped him out. This sort of stuff. I didn't like the place either. It sort of had a weird sort of aura sort of about it. So a very sort of spooky like sort of a place. Here, this place is the most creepiest joint I have near ever sort of ran across in my sort of entire life. Like, absolutely sort of really sort of creepy and sort of thing like that. Like, I mean, really, really sort of creepy. This Aylmer Cemetery there, they call it sort of, it goes back to like 1812, right? Sort of there, this Bellevue Cemetery. I was there one time. Some person had died or something, and I knew somebody. And somehow it ended up, they convinced me to come along with them in this group, right? So we get to this place, and right away, man, I've seen that, like, my whole system was sick from it. It was so creepy of a place. It had the most terrible smell and aura all around and stuff. It might be different now and stuff like that, but at the time, you're right at this church thing, and right away you could see some graves right off on the edge of it, sort of like not far off of it, and they're sitting there, and there was this weird sort of creek, sort of like this weird pathway, and this sort of like little tree forest off on the left, and we decided to go walk away from this a little bit and just walking around out on the grounds of it and things like that. And I lit up a smoke and started staring at. And this weird sort of guy started running a really full blast, and you could see him running through sort of the trees down in this pathway. But when the guy sort of came out on the opening where, like, we should have all seen him there, he wasn't there anymore, so he was gone. So, but I mean, he looked like some kind of weird jogger-like sort of guy, right? So we were all freaked out by this and wondering what the hell, like, why is there somebody running around in a graveyard sort of area? Like, it seemed weird to us, right? Well, years later, I found out that this place is supposedly haunted, and apparently people have seen people around this sort of same spot, like doing weird, sort of similar behavior, running around or doing sort of weird things like that. And it wouldn't have surprised me the best. So I can't say that's what I saw. Maybe it was just some fluke in a million sort of thing. But he did look weird. He didn't look like normal humany, like sort of the full figure to him. And he looked strange. And I mean, why was the guy sort of like a maniac? And where did he go? Because you would have thought we would have seen him as he'd go around the bend, but I mean, he just didn't go around the bend. He sort of disappeared at this sort of angle, sort of, and that was it, right? So very strange. It was just another sort of weird thing that I don't have an explanation for. That it seemed that was pretty weird, but it's certainly extremely creepy. Right? So, anyways, if you happen to be over in that sort of area, that place has been around since 1812, so a long time, right? So, sort of thing like that, but. I hear the Bytown Museum, early building along the Rideau Canal there, and sort of like this, and is supposed to be haunted by Colonel By. He built the canal system there, and thousands of like these workers died and different stuff from malaria, different things. So a lot of different things happen there. So it'd be very sort of feasible. I met this drunk fellow that was fishing down there, and this guy was, a pretty big wino sort of a guy and stuff like that. But they had in there, and they had it open at that point in the summer, and and I was fishing down there and stuff like this, and this guy was fishing with this sort of hand line, and he sort of wanted to go out and get some more sort of a beer and stuff like that. He asked me if I could sort of make sure his stuff wasn't taken, right? So I said, oh yeah. I said, I'm not going anywhere for a while and stuff like this. I said, but could you wait for a minute? I said, they got sort of stuff in there. Maybe I can get a soft drink or sort of an ice cream cone or something, right? And they had those sort of things. And he says, oh no, he says, don't go in there, don't go in there. And I said, why not? Like this, he says, that place is haunted. Like this. So he said that he saw a few times at night when he'd be sort of passed out around that sort of area like that he saw some kind of weird sort of glowing sort of entity through these windows here on this side, right? They would go back and forth and things like that. So pretty strange. There was a lady that was working there before, and she had said that she thought she saw something in her back office room, that something had moved and some kind of weird thing there. Like she wasn't 100% sure of exactly if it was this Colonel By guy or not, but she was convinced that it was a ghost of some sort that was sort of in there. And I've heard some other secondhand stories from others that have seen something in there and things like that. So very feasible. There was even if it's not him half the time, it could be others. I mean, there was army guys there in the 1700s and all kinds of weird stuff, and werewolves and everything else floating around there. And already, as you know, Jean-Guy is showing the secret back tables and behind there and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff. But actually, there is a secret sort of tunnel that's right around this sort of area that goes underneath the whole sort of river sort of thing. But apparently inhabited by giant killer guardian rats of some sort. So I like the idea of it. Good stuff, but very interesting. But here, this one here, the Canadian Nature Museum. That place is really creepy, I must admit. I've been in there a lot of times, and because I like sort of the animal ones and the all that sort of things, and there's been a lot of sort of strange stuff. There was these guards that sort of would work there sometimes, and they'd run off and sort of quit their shift in the middle of the night. There was this count sort of guy, like some kind of royalty sort of guy from the 1700s sort of thing, and this guy sort of was pretty creepy, sort of stuff like that. So there's some weird tales about it, but especially like up on the fourth floor, I've heard that these, like, they'll get these masks that they have in their collection, they'll move around. But what I felt even in this place and stuff like this is you'd be walking around and it's just normal, then all of a sudden you'd feel this freezing cold draft all around you. And I mean, there's nothing there though. Like 2 inches later, then there's nothing again, and like a really sort of bad vibe about this place. So I've never sort of like, even though I went to it quite a few times just because of the animals sort of thing, and I also wanted to I had to go see because there was a scientist there that was. I had the Bosberg cripple print, so I went there one time for that reason. But I mean, other than that, I sort of tried to evade it, sort of because it seemed to sort of have some, even myself, every time I was in there, I sort of always had a sort of weird feeling. Especially there was this exhibit that they used to have that was there with all these sort of early caveman like sort of people or something that they'd be showing like early sort of things and natives and this sort of stuff. And there was this one weird exhibit sort of area. I think it's on the second or third floor, but anyways, it sort of had a weird sort of creepiness, and you'd always get these weird sort of cold spells around that sort of spot. So I experienced that several times where they were weird, like I must admit, like something a bit out there. Now the place looks a lot different. They built some kind of weird sort of thing up on the top of it, and they got mastodons out in the park and all kinds of weird stuff like that, but super interesting there like that. So this is, I love this story. Years ago, I was out fishing away, and there was this strange guy that used to drive around in a boat where the guy had a door in built sort of like almost like screwed into the bottom, a giant oak door. So if this would make any sense to you, I wish somebody to explain it to me because he's the only one in history that I ever seen would do such a behavior. But this guy would go up and down the river. He did explain it to me, but still his explanation is so bizarre that it's more weirder than the story that he told me next. Anyways, this guy he was like a commander sort of a character, sort of a guy, and he would go up and down the river and drift around with this giant door in front of him, and every once in a while he would sort of get up and almost the whole boat would start to tip on him now, and he would reach up a little bit, and then he would reach with his hand and open up a little miniature door that was in top of the giant door. And then he'd peek out through that and to see if there was anybody up ahead for a while. And then he'd close it again and sit back down and continue drinking his quart of Labatt. Right? So I'm watching this guy and I'm totally fascinated by him. So I said, I gotta talk to this dude. I was like, I gotta find out, why is this guy driving around with a giant door, and why does he, like, why would you block your view like that, right? It made no sense to me, right? So anyway, I sort of cut it sort of on the side of him, waited for him to come along, and I just kept casting out and stuff like this. And I said, "Bonjour, how are you?" and all this sort of stuff like that. So anyways, he said, "Oh," he says, wonderful day," like this. And I said, "That's quite an unusual design you got for your boat there with the giant oak door." I said, just out of curiosity, like, what are you using that for? Like this. So then he said, I don't like the sun. It bugs me sometimes. So I find this much easier. I mean, there's nobody around here. It's just logs, the odd monster. That not much. Eh? The only thing worse I could run across here is maybe the devil canoe. And I said, devil canoe? So then right away, the second he said this, then this, my head went just ching, like, what does this mean, right? So basically I could get up to this point that this character was using the door, I guess, to block like sunny days because he didn't like the sun in his face. But I mean, absolutely bizarre. But so then he says, yeah, he says, the devil canoe. And I said, the devil canoe? I said, what the hell's the devil canoe? He said, you never hear of the devil canoe? I said, no. He says, I know somebody that saw him. He's usually up on the upper Ottawa River more, but he comes down here too sometimes like this, especially the stormy night or especially in the moonlit night. What he is he's like an evil sort of demon man. He's the devil. And he has this big canoe. And if you are on the shore and you need to cross the river and it's like a big and stormy, or that you want to cross the river and it's a moonlit night, he likes to patrol and he waits for people that want to. Maybe they had some beers and stuff like this. He can convince them and to give them a drive so they can get over on the other, onto the Quebec side and get some beer. So I said, really? I said, so what? This guy brings them over there? Does he get them beer or what does he do? Right? So then he says, no, no, you have to sign. You get into his boat, and then if you agree to take the ride to the other side to get the beer, you have to sign on this magic paper. He said, my friend saw him. He tried to make him sort of sign the paper, and my friend said, screw it. I will wait. I'll get my own beer later on, because even though he was desperate, he just he knew there was something wrong. He didn't want to sign his soul to the devil, but normally some of them have, and what they do, they sign this paper, and then he brings them and it flies, and he'll bring you sort of to the other side of the river, and you can sort of get your beer, but you belong to him now. You're now the sort of, you're like a mignon, you call them. And then, I mean, I just love this. So I thought he was crazy, like out of his mind, sort of like this. But then I said, there's some sort of, so I started asking and asking, never could get a response from 10 zillion sort of people along the river, until finally one day, this one fellow said, oh yeah, he says, I know about that. He says, it's an old sort of French urban legend about that there's this canoe that travels up and down the Ottawa River, and you got to sort of, if you want to get across on the other side, you got to sign a sort of paper. So this guy actually knew this guy that was on the upper Ottawa River. He tried to, I missed a part of the story, but because this guy he'd make me laugh so much, it was so crazy. But what apparently happened is that somebody was night fishing up on the upper Ottawa River above this sort of Ebietti's Dam somewhere. And he was along there sort of thing like this, and they ran out of sort of beer like this, and he said that this ghostly canoe looked like it flied and sort of landed right in front of him. And the guy said, hey, do you need to get some beer? You want to get on the other side? But you're going to have to sign this paper. Right? So then the guy sort of changed his mind with the other ones there and didn't want to sort of get into this sort of canoe, right? So it's actually based on sort of a real sort of thing here, at least of the urban legend part of it. So you're this guy, so I mean, all in the same day. I mean, how could you beat that? You see a guy that drives around with a giant oak door in his boat, with this like little sort of about the 12-foot long sort of a miniature sort of aluminum boat, right? A typical V-hull sort, right, with a 7.5 sort of motor on the back of it, sort of thing. Your typical little sort of angler sort of setup in a small little lake of some sort, right, and this sort of thing. But you got this giant sort of like 8-foot tall solid oak door, and sort of seemingly bolted to it, right? So absolutely bizarre. But anyways, there's another sort of mysterious. So if you're ever along the sort of Ottawa River, and you're on the sort of Ontario side, and you see this devil canoe guy, I mean, definitely don't sign that paper in there, because first of all, they keep our beer stores here open later nowadays. So you might be able to still make it anyways. And B, they have pubs open to all kinds of the hours, and they even have a bar along the upper Ottawa River around around the beach there, so you could go up just a little bit further there and hit the beach, and then get a beer there too. Stuff like that. So if I was you, I'd stay away from the devil canoe guy. He sounds a bit rough there. I'm not sure exactly what he looks like. The guy couldn't sort of describe whatever, but I mean, it seemed a bit out there. It's absolutely interesting. Just another sort of thing. Here's some other reported ones that are supposed to be haunted. Rideau High School. When I was young, there was this girl that was sort of hanging out with a little bit here and there and sort of stuff like this. And we'd hang out on the weekends and I'd bring her out fish with me and things like that. And she told me that her sister had saw one time they were out sort of coming back late from some kind of wild shindig of some sort of thing. And they were coming back along that sort of Rito High School, and they saw it looked like these sort of two sort of football players, but they were running, but you could almost see through them. Sort of like as if they were sort of like a ghost of some sort. And they just went around sort of about halfway around this sort of track, and then all of a sudden they were gone. And I mean, there's nowhere they could go and stuff like that, right? The old Osgood Public School there, they used to say that there was some sort of a creepy sort of thing. They would see a shadow going up and down the sort of hallways in the basement sort of area and stuff like that way back in the day. I don't know if anybody's reported it in modern times, but that way back in ages ago, they used to have that. Grounds of the old teachers' college, they used to have this teachers' college that they had tore down and stuff like that, and that place was supposed to be haunted in there and stuff like that. A church on Chapel Street has a haunted paintings in it, and this is so pretty interesting sort of stuff like this. I met several people that sort of like, you would look at these, there's these paintings in this sort of gym area that they'd have inside this church, and actually you'd be looking at them and the eyes would actually move with you. Right? Sort of stuff like this. The church on Sussex, that big Catholic church, is supposed to be haunted there as well. The Governor General's home, there's been sightings there. City Hall, same thing, weird lighting sort of things where the lights will go on and off, and weird sort of stuff like that where it might be electrical issues of some sort and stuff like this. This is a wild one, and I'd forgotten to do the Grim Reaper one because it creeps me out so much even talking about it that it's the most convincing thing to me I've seen of what, you know what I mean? Yeah, there must be other sort of things out there that we don't understand. But there was this Vanier apartment sort of area not far from this sort of creepy sort of creepy sort of Grim Reaper sort of sighting. There was this sort of apartment that was inhabited by these two lesbians that would sort of, I guess, be quite amorous late in the evening, and it was paper thin walls apparently in these buildings, right? So the action of all this sort of moaning and groaning throughout the evening would keep these sort of neighbors up and stuff like this. So they chucked them out, but they said that they were sort of witches of some sort, like that they were doing some kind of weird sort of seance like things in there. And they believe that they sort of either haunted it or cursed the place after, because then after that new residents had started moving into sort of the place beside it, they would hear this hot moaning and groaning sort of stuff through the walls, yet these people didn't live there anymore, right? So it was sort of stuff like this, and this went on for several years, but also in the same sort of project sort of area, not far off from it, was the most creepiest sort of thing that I've ever sort of personally encountered, where it was even much more creepier. The girl, at least the girl was sort of like, I mean, she wasn't threatening looking. She was just a cute little girl sort of thing, right? So, I mean, yeah, you know, she's skipping along. So, I mean, it wasn't sort of like a frightening experience to you that way, sort of thing like that. And even the ones in the Manitic Mill were weird, but I mean, they didn't come out and try and bite at you and stuff like this. But this thing had a presence of the most evil, sort of weirdest, sort of crazy thing that I have ever sort of run across. And at one point, 10 of us, at least in this room, saw this thing at the same time. And I actually saw this thing about 4 different occasions in about a 3 to 4 month span of visiting this guy's apartment. My buddy was living there, and he had rented out this apartment and stuff like that. We were young guys, so we'd hit his place on the weekend there, and you'd have the ladies over and all this kind of stuff, and we'd play caps and all these kinds of things like this. And when you moved in there, he moved in and stuff like this, they had this letter. It said, beware of people with switchblades and all this kind of stuff. So pretty scary already. But then it says, beware the don't pay attention to any of the damage in this sort of place, or if you hear noises and stuff, don't be too concerned about it. We're going to be fixing up the solution. So what the hell did all this mean, right? So anyways, he's wondering about this sort of stuff like this, and he decided to have this sort of christening like party and things like this. So a group of us are there, and we're sitting around and sort of in his sort of living room and things like this. And you sort of we went over to the sort of to the side, right at the door, right in front of the door. So you got the door. You're sort of the side of it because the living room was on the side of it, so you're looking sort of right. Right at the door, all of a sudden, this thing appeared there. And this guy looked exactly like a Grim Reaper, but on the side. Nobody ever saw him by the face, okay? But here's what he looked like. He had this sort of weird robe on him, like a monk. And a robe like sort of thick, shadowy head, sort of, but this was not a shadow. This was a three-dimensional sort of image here with sort of like thickness, like, but it looked like a smog, an evil black smog. I don't. Maybe like if you've ever seen the old Wizard of Oz or weird stuff, you know, when you see the blacky smog. Well, imagine that, but like a condensed sort of shape that was sort of blackish gray sort of color. But on the sides of the robe, it actually had these sort of wrinkles in it, and it looked like this guy was crouched down, like not actually sitting, but like he's sitting, but sort of like with his legs sort of where his feet are positioned on the ground too, and he's sort of sitting there, but his robe gown sort of covered all that, so you didn't really see his feet or anything like that sort of thing. It just like the robe part covered it, but that looks what it looked like he was doing. And on the side of his arm, he had this weird sort of staff. It looked exactly like a cane or a staff of some sort like this. So I double checked my eyes, triple checked them. I said, holy shit, what am I staring at? So I didn't want to say anything because I thought I was hallucinating. I said, did somebody slip me something in these beers or what's going on here, right? So I'm thinking all these paranoid sort of stuff here, thinking I'm freaking out sort of because I couldn't believe what I'm looking at, but I'm looking at the side and I didn't want to see what this thing looked like front-wise, right? Sort of thing like this. So then I hear this one guy sort of he turns his head. This guy, fellow Teddy, he turns his sort of head, and he said, "What the hell is that?" And then these other sort of people all started looking, and there was this girl, this young, very cute young sort of lady that sort of my younger buddy was sort of dating, and he had her over sort of a thing, and she had the wildest name from like outer space, like Zauki or Zuki or some kind of wild sort of name like that. That was just very unusual that I had never heard of before back in those days with somebody like a name like this. But this blonde sort of Barbie looking sort of girl, and her face just dropped right to the ceiling. She said, "Oh my God, what is that?" sort of thing like this. And then we started like this, and one of them started actually having enough nerve to walk towards it, and the thing just vanished. It was gone. And I said, what the shit like this? So we all started talking about it and saying, my God, he looked really reminded you of like a Grim Reaper sort of an idea, right? So that's what it looked like. It looked like a monk to some kind of thing like that, but it looked like he had some kind of staff, weird sort of thing, and it did have a sort of a curvature, weird sort of a thing up at the top a little bit, almost like a sort of sickle-like thing. Not as pronounced as what I've ever seen in these sort of like a typical drawing of one, but I mean, it was similar enough to me that maybe that's what it was, right? So anyways, I couldn't believe this. I just couldn't believe what sort of occurred here, right? So then we talked about it and talked about it all night. Nobody could sort of sleep or anything like this, and we were still playing capsule 4 or 5 in the morning, and obviously way more sort of plastered by this point, and nobody's seen it again. So you'd think you'd hallucinate more by this point, right? But anyways, I was determined to get an answer for this. So I figured, okay, there must be some optical illusion there. Maybe the side windows shoot because the side windows could get light through the little kitchen that may possibly hit that door somehow. So we started experimenting with that at different times of night, walking around with getting a couple of people, putting a light behind you, putting a cast in the shadow, trying 10 zillion things, going down the hallway, casting your shadow that way, everything. None of this stuff looked like this at all. I tried every sort of thing. And 3 other occasions in there, the same sort of thing occurred. I came out of this sort of bathroom and this thing was sort of just going away. I didn't see its face again, thank goodness. But that same girl was there. One of them, the one that he was dating, and she sort of yelped and sort of like this, so she was paranoid of this place too, and actually stopped going around there after a while. But she seemed to be also interested in this sort of thing, so that could be sort of the reason why she kept coming back. Plus, she liked him, right? But I mean, the point is that different sort of individuals saw this thing probably at least 3-4 different sort of separate occasions. And different people, and times that I wasn't there, that others had saw it and stuff like this, including several sort of other ladies that was at this place, and different sort of individuals. So it was quite sort of convincing, where I can't believe this many people had hallucination. But here's the kicker. We found out later from another sort of thing that somebody was murdered there, exactly in that sort of place. So that's probably the answer. That was some kind of sort of thing, like some kind of bad over sort of leftover sort of thing, or maybe really him, right? Maybe the guy's pissed off. Maybe that's why he left us alone, because he knew we had nothing to do with that sort of thing like that. But whatever the case, man, that's the most convincing thing I've ever seen, that yeah, there must be something in the afterworld. So that's why I sort of believe in some of these things, because once you sort of like, I mean, for most people you're skeptical. Even at that, if I'd never seen even one thing in my life of weirdness, just like the UFOs, I would still look at, because I'm an historic person, I would still think that they must exist, simply because of the tens of thousands of sort of reports, right? And sort of things like that. But I mean, absolutely sort of extremely creepy, sort of a one of a sort of a kind sort of thing there, where I must admit, I've seen a lot of sort of weird things over the years, but definitely that was sort of by far the sort of weirdest, creepiest sort of thing. But there's a kicker to this that's even weirder. Years later, I was sort of going down Bank Street, and maybe somebody recognizes this, maybe somebody took a picture of it, maybe somebody could tell me who this saint or whatever this guy was, but there was this creepy statue that was 1,000% identical to what we saw. So much so, it was the same size, the same kneeling position, the same sort of a weird cane like thing, the same sort of robe that he's got, with the same even wrinkled areas. I have no idea who they were portraying. Was this guy some kind of saint, a monk, or whatever sort of thing? So whoever this dude was some kind of historical figure, I'd imagine, for somebody to go through all that trouble to sort of make that, or maybe it was some kind of evil sort of thing that they were showing there or something. I don't even know what kind of church that is. It looked to be Catholic or whatever, but it was on Bank Street. I went by it recently, and I did not see the statue there, so maybe they removed it. But whatever the case, if somebody knows the answer to that, or what saint or goosely ghoul that might have been, he identical look to what we saw. So whatever it was, all I know is that it couldn't have been a shadow. I tried 10 zillion sort of things to sort of explain this, and just no, you couldn't sort of do it, right? This sort of stuff. So that's all I can tell you is that out of all the sort of strange things I've seen, because I saw it like, you know what I mean, at least like three, four times, or somewhere in there, sort of like this. But it creeps me out so much, I hate even thinking about it. Like, I mean, really, I didn't even want to cover it on the show because I can still see the thing, and I mean, I all I'm happy is because I would have near I probably would have crapped my pants like if I had saw this thing by the front and its eyes open up and stare at you or something. I think I would have would like lost it like completely eventually. I mean, all I'm thankful for is I don't know what that thing was. I don't know whatever, but all I can tell you is that we could not duplicate any kind of shadow that could sort of make any sort of shape like that. Also, not even remotely that darkness, and certainly not that thickness of texture. See, that's the difference. Like when you look at a shadow, you're just seeing it on the wall. It's like flat with it. This was out. Like this thing was like it was at least a foot and a half or 2 feet out, sort of his robe out into the hallway now, right? So, I mean, even at first, I knew right away, like before I was even trying to explain this to myself, I still, even at that point, knew kind of that that couldn't be the answer because, I mean, you could tell this thing was like a real shape here, like sort of thing, right? So, I mean, absolutely terrifying. It was the most weirdest sort of creepy thing, but I mean, somebody was actually murdered around there. I don't know if it exactly was the same apartment that we were in, or if it was just in that sort of the one beside it or whatever. But I mean, nevertheless, no matter what, I mean, there was some kind of, yeah, you know, at least bad mojo going around in that sort of place, right? Like that. So absolutely fascinating sort of a thing that still I have no answer for. Can't tell you what on earth that could have been. But absolutely very interesting. Anyways, sort of like where it's one of those things out there that makes you wonder, right? You know, like I said, because I'm a person that I mean, I could believe a lot of these things could be lights or some kind of weird illusional effect of some sort or whatever. I mean, all these things sound good to me. I'm willing to believe it because, I mean, for me to, I don't want to know that there's sort of there's sort of stuff around, right? I mean, it's not my interest. I'm interested in the living cryptozoological world. I'm not interested in sort of the ghostly world because I don't see any purpose to it. But it's not something I could ever sort of, you know, I mean, fix up here or anything, right? Like I couldn't prove this sort of stuff, and so there's no way of catching a ghost that I know of. So I don't see really like much. Like I mean, I couldn't ever resolve the answer because even if I could get them on film and start hanging out in haunted houses, I'm sure since I've been lucky enough this time, I wouldn't doubt if it would happen again, right? But sort of thing. But the thing is that. Um, still there would be no sort of like way really that you could sort of prove this sort of thing, right? So I mean, to me it's not a cryptid worth sort of chasing in my mind, like sort of thing like that. Plus, how do I know? Like, I mean, if you hear all these ancient tales of sort of like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, there was voodoo like stuff to them, some are cursed, this, that, that. I mean, why mess with something that you don't really know what that is, like, and stuff like this? Like, you hear these strange stories from Hawaii there where every year thousands of people will send back even a grain of sand that they captured on their shoes because this curse of the sort of you bring stuff from there that isn't, I guess, approved by this goddess that's over there. This happens where these people have had gigantic bad luck, like tons of stuff where it seems beyond probability of just being chance here, right? So that's a sort of an interesting sort of a thing to it where it would make you wonder, like, I mean, the probability of so many people having these petrifying sort of things happen to them after sort of now doing this, right? You sort of wonder, like, maybe there would be almost something to it, right? So, since we would have no understanding of the supernatural world out there, of sort of what happens next after life, sort of, except from these sort of things that we get from stories and things like that that we can't sort of actually verify, right? there's no way of really sort of knowing what sort of would be out there. So, I mean, to say it couldn't exist, you know what I mean? I'm not going to go that way either, because I know I've seen some pretty strange things that would sort of match what you would say would be a ghost. So I would sort of then, in my mind, I mean, I don't have as much of a problem with it, considering, like I said, that my ancient relatives for thousands of years there have been seeing ghosts in Scotland and Ireland, all over the place. Right? So these kinds of things, and through Europe, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and all these other countries, right? And sort of stuff like that. So, but uh, absolutely. So there's some pretty weird things out there that are kind of, you know, definitely there is something to ghosts, whatever they may be. Like, I mean, if they're actually really spirits that are ancestors dead from after, that's very plausible. There might be other solutions to this of some sort, of some kind of noisy spirits, as they call them, poltergeists, you know, where they're restless, mad, and some kind of death or something, or some kind of thing like that. I mean, there's a lot of sort of things to this, right, where it'd be feasible, many sorts of theories as to what these things could really actually be, right? But still very, like, bizarre, I must admit. The next one I'll tell you about, though, is the Montreal haunted toilet. This is a wild one. Hundreds of people saw the Montreal haunted toilet. There was this pretty wild sort of a lady. She had this apartment, and she was a younger sort of lady. So back in those days, if you could find some chick that had her own apartment and she's only like 16, 17, and she'd have these wild shindigs every sort of weekend, well, of course, she was a pretty popular lady. That sort of thing for the young. So she lived in this sort of old apartment building, and there was this haunted toilet inside of it. And I saw this thing personally about at least 5, 6 times do stuff that is mind-bogglingly insane. Every single person that would go to this sort of parties on these sort of weekends that she would have them would go there. All the people would see them. The ladies were terrified of going into the sort of toilet from it once they this would happen to them once. This toilet bowl was haunted. It had an old antique handle that was so heavy, and a giant chain inside, and the whole sort of thing, right? This thing was like you had to press really hard with your hand to get it to make a flush, right? And it was so powerful, though, it looked like it could suck down like a dozen people at once. Seriously, it would go like this, right? And it was really crazy ass old powerful one. And you'd be sitting there, and all of a sudden you'd hear like this, like these strange moans from death almost, or stuff like this. And then the thing would start flushing, and you'd see the handle actually moving with a consistent sort of pressure. And then all of a sudden he would shoot it past and do different sort of ones, like it wasn't even the same sort of thing. You can't sort of yeah, you can have loose chains and leakage and all this kind of weird stuff, but something was physically shaking this thing up and down and playing with it on purpose. Like, it couldn't be from that sort of stuff. I've never seen in all the sort of toilets with weird leakage and helping somebody trying to fix these things. I know a little bit about that sort of stuff. And you never see anything like this. So, I mean, absolutely weird. So she got so used to it that she didn't even care about it. And she would actually be sitting there, and sometimes just for entertainment value, she would get up and sort of, instead of flushing the John herself, she'd start washing her hands and letting the ghost flush the John for her. Instantly, I mean, but she would get thrills out of this, getting especially people that are sort of skeptical and stuff like this, and get them to watch. And it was a creepy, long, dark hallway, right? These buildings were built really weird way back in the day, and really long hallway to it. and you'd see this tiny little, it was a very small bathroom, so the door would be open and all you'd see is this creepy toilet. So like as if he was like an entity or a godlike monster sitting there, right? That was the sort of view that you got. You didn't even see the side of the sink really, just this toilet thing was there, right? And then all of a sudden it would start gurgling and then it would go like this, and you'd start seeing the handles going down, right? And I mean, people would sort of like freak out. A lot of people would leave and not come back because they were actually terrified of it, right? But then others, like myself, over time, sort of after seeing it a few times, I said, "Wow, that's pretty wild." But I mean, I also found it sort of interestingly entertaining. There was another case like this in a McDonald's in sort of Texas, where the same thing where the toilet will keep flushing constantly like this, and they hear a guy, it sounds like he's burping. So, so my suspect is that probably some poor guy ate a mega rotten Ronnie's meal or too many of them, sort of probably croaked there or something like this, and now is haunting the place, constantly burping up this refuse of this rotten Ronnie's after meal server, or one of those McCrib sandwiches there. That sort of stuff, right? But they found out after that these crazy mothers actually somehow, look at how crooked our politicians are. This was a native's grave before area, and so they allowed them to sort of, because it's all bigwigs, right? They allowed them to build over this spot and just left all their bodies there. So of course, I mean, that's a pretty weird stuff. But there's been people that were locked in the freezer in this place, where they go in there and all of a sudden the freezer sort of locks on them, yet there's nobody around, and some other weird stuff, and hearing howling inside the freezer. Again, probably the guy howling from this reek of this rotten Ronnie's meals constantly, right? Could you imagine these poor ghosts, like all they're smelling is Big McCracks there, being cooked around the clock there, sort of 24 hours a day. I'd imagine that'd be enough to sort of get a lot of ghosts sort of possibly burping up the storm there. So, I mean, I can certainly see that. But anyways, very interesting, but very weird. Like, I mean, there's a lot of strange things out there that are sort of hard to explain sometimes, right? So here we'll talk about some local witches here. This is extremely entertaining. Boy, do I got a couple of interesting stories for you for this sort of stuff like this. So now there's witches of all sorts. There's these weekend people and all these sorts of other stuff like this. This is nothing. This is just for where we ran across extremely strange witch-like characters that are sort of pretty strange, that wouldn't fit into the normal Wiccan or any regular witch sort of group out there, right? So, like, I mean, I'm sure there's some nice witches out there. Most of these people, from what I understand, is a vast majority of them are into sort of, they just want to bless with Mother Nature and all that sort of stuff. So, that sort of thing. But here's a depiction there of Madeline that Jean-Guy's hiding from. There's another one, and that's sort of what she looks like. So let's next talk about witches. So we're going to talk about some entertaining local witches. I've had a few run-ins with some pretty strange things of the witch-like variety here. Here's a depiction of Madeline after disciplining John Keith. So if you see her patrolling around the edges of Vanier, if she comes back over from Quebec, please contact us right away, sort of, so I can warn Jean-Guy that she's out in the patrol. So if you see any woman that looks like this on Montreal Road or in the Vanier region, I mean, definitely contact us as soon as humanly possible, as soon as stuff like this. But witch, werewolf sort of ladies and gents have been around, reported since time began nearly, right? So, and I mean, and a lot of witches are nice and stuff like that, and they do sort of like natural sort of practices. They're interested in the I don't know, they believe in different sort of spirit-like gods out there that are sort of nature and these different things like that. So a lot of witches get a bad rap too, in the sense that, I mean, they're not all riding a broom. Like, actually one will cover later, but I mean, in typical, a lot of them sort of aren't doing that sort of a behavior, and quite nice. In fact, I might have dated one. She didn't say she was one, but she did a lot of strange things. She was extremely hot, so very cute, sort of Marcia. And but anyways, that's kind of what she looked like there. And that's how she typically dressed, and her hair was sort of like that. So she was. Sort of extremely cute, sort of thing. But she would sort of when if you were sort of like sometimes if she was pissed off or something, if she wasn't liking some of your sort of you know whatever you're doing, she would do these weird sort of like as if she was mumbling to herself and sort of like incantations sort of stuff like this. And I saw her a few times walking along, and she'd be in the room and sort of like as if she was sort of talking to some sort of like as if you were praying to something or something. Stupid weird, but anyway, but I quite liked her anyway. So even if she wasn't, she wasn't trying to get me roped into whatever she was, whoever she was talking to. Sort of stuff, but so it was all good. Anyways, a very cute, sort of nice looking girl, and very intelligent and sort of stuff like that. She got even higher marks than ever than just about any of us out there that were typical and sort of stuff like that. So she was quite intelligent, but I mean, and I didn't see her normally talking to herself or anything, but it seemingly she had like all this weird incense and strange books and all kinds of weird stuff that was laying around in her room there that I was in a few times. And even her bed was extremely sort of strange. Her parents sort of had it all dullish, like as if she was still younger than what she was. Sort of, so it was pretty unusual. but but I certainly found her entertaining, and it was a nice. So she was a nice witch. So I think some of them get a bad rap there. But anyway, um, local witches here. So first, we're going to talk about this the most one of the wackiest things I have ever seen in my entire life, the Vanier witch. Okay. So I went. I went to pick up these brothers, and they were visiting over at their granny's, right? And I'd never been to their granny's place yet at that sort of point like this. And their granny came from this ancient sort of Transylvanian like sort of town, right, where these people sort of anything is, you know what I mean, unusual could be relegated to a werewolf, witches, ghosts, and these sorts of stuff, right? So, I mean, I got a lot of fascinating, interesting sort of tales from them because they would be talking back and forth with her, and she was learning to speak English a bit better each time, sort of thing. And some of the stuff that she came up with was just absolutely fascinating. But uh, I'm going to sort of go pick them up, and I was wearing this sort of leather jacket, right? So all of a sudden, I'm coming up the stairs, and she comes running out. This little short sort of granny that they had, right? And she's a nice little, funny, sort of nice, very characteristic looking face to her and stuff like that, but quite a small sort of lady. And she comes running out, and she's got this pile of change, and she says, Fonzie, Fonzie, here, Fonzie, like this. And I'm saying, what? They're like, why are you handing me change? This is what I'm thinking of. And these brothers and stuff were a bit sort of slow to ever get motivated to get out the door sort of thing. So they weren't the type that you'd have to knock, wait for them to maneuver around for 20 minutes. So always come early if you really had to be on time by someplace, because it would take you half an hour to get them out of there sort of idea, right? But so, anyways, they come blindly sauntering along, and she's screaming, Fonzie, Fonzie. And I said, why is she calling me Fonzie and stuff like this? And things like this. So they start talking to her. And she had saw some kind of like, I guess, biker like movie of some sort in the Fawns. And so she thought because that you got this leather jacket on that you must be some kind of like hood like guy, right? So she thought that I was coming there to sort of possibly mug her. So she was handing me out change, saying, "Here, Fonzie, like, don't, this is all I have," sort of stuff. So I just lost it, and I told him, no, no, like, explained to her that other people wear leather jackets, not everybody's the boss, sort of stuff, right? So finally she calms down and things like this, and then she says, we're sitting there and they're sort of blindly maneuvering around, getting their coats and these different things, and she says, "Did you see her? Did you see her?" And I said, "Who?" Like this. She goes, "Vanier Witcho, Vanier Witcho," right? So then I said, "Oh my God, is it Vanier Witcho?" And right away, I tuned right into this, and I'm thinking, "Oh, this sounds like a great story I'm going to be getting here." He's thinking, right? So they start translating back and forth because she could barely speak a word of sort of English. And apparently, across the street, there was a witch that was living there that looks exactly like this lady here. I saw her. Yes, she does look like that. This lady was like a, well, 3 foot something on her, maybe possibly 4 feet at the tallest, because she had funny shoes on, and so that might have made her a little bit taller. But she had some kind of wacky sort of cane with her. She had this giant bling of seemingly some kind of medallions on it. I'm not sure what they were. They didn't look like crosses and stuff, so I'm presuming something else, right? So, but anyways, this is what this lady was sort of dressed like, and she told me that this lady kept coming across and was zapping her and cursing Fonzies and different people that would drive up and down her street. She didn't like them invading her turf, so she would run out at their vehicles and give them some kind of hexing, she was explaining, right? So I said, I gotta see this. And anyways, I finally get these guys out, and we went out to sort of this pub down further down to meet this character that was coming out of there, and then we were all going to go down to sort of this park along this sort of waterway and stuff like that, and have a few beers and this sort of thing. So, anyways, we start leaving and stuff like that, and the night progresses for a while. So somebody had one of them had forgotten some important thing to them in the house of the grannies, so they decided that they wanted to sort of come back like this. So we're going there. It's late at night, like this, and all of a sudden we start coming around the corner. This tiny little lady, just exactly like in this picture, this crazy, same kind of a woman, attacked these guys over in Iraq someplace, and they were running at these police or whatever they were. So there's all these different theories. Maybe some police pull a joke on another policeman or these sort of things like that. But I mean, nobody's really sort of proven who this was or whatever. I mean, whoever they are, they're pretty weird. Really, like, I mean, to get an actor like that, you'd have to sort of really a pretty strange one. But anyway, she looked exactly like this. She wore like a little sort of long sort of dress that would go down to the bottom of her sort of feet. Usually it was white. She was in a couple of times. It was in a black one that we'd seen her over the ages, because I saw her about 4 or 5 times. But the first time she was out in one sort of just like this white one, she had a handkerchief on her head and this gigantic sort of nose on her with all this sort of pile of bling and these strange looking sort of almost witch like sort of sandally shoes between a leprechaun's and a witch, as you would imagine would wear something, right? So, anyways, she's standing there out in the thing, and this guy comes zooping back again. Apparently, he was bugging her, I guess, or something. Maybe he sort of. But he had went down the street like this, and I guess this caused her to come out and sort of run at him. So now he's turning around, and he's coming back down this sort of the street like this, and she comes out and she goes like this, and she starts doing these sort of like crazy ritual, moving her hands and doing weird sort of stuff, like as if she's hexing this guy in this charger that's zipping up and down in his macho charger, right? Sort of thing like this. So I'm in hysterics from this, like, what is this crazy lady on? Is she really a witch? Does she? Right? And sort of stuff like this. So then all of a sudden, The friggin' we start walking up to the thing like this. The granny comes running out and starts charging towards her, and she puts she puts the cross of heaven right in front of her, and she says, "Be gone, Penny Witcho, be gone, be gone." Like this. So then the lady goes like this, and then she shoots back into the house and starts wobbling with her little cane thing, and she walked exactly like this crazy lady, like the same kind of weird sort of thing. So I mean, and I never say. Of course, this film is recent, but this is what I can remember quite well, right? So, anyways, she sort of pulls back in there like this, and so we go back into the granny's place, and he gets this thing, and I said, I asked him to ask her why was she doing that? Was she like protecting herself with some kind of the power of God? And I was just curious what her reasoning was. And she said, yeah, when I see her, if she comes out and gets at the cars and stuff, I go out and I sort of block her with the magic power of something or other. So it was some kind of weird sort of Christian like ritual here of some sort she was doing. I'm not sure exactly. I know she was Christian of some sort, but which one I'm not sure exactly, right? But anyways, so I said, "Oh my God, this is wild." She says, so then she comes up with this wild thing. She says, "Her daughter is a witch too. She dressed tramp like this." Right? So then I said, "A tramp, her daughter." I said, "Wow." I said, "This sounds even more entertaining, right?" So I said, "How come I haven't seen her like this?" And they said that she's usually out sort of on sort of Montreal Road, someplace like this. And I said, "Oh man, I got to see this. Like I got to see what this daughter's like, whatever." And so anyways, the granny's explaining that the daughter dresses like really like a lady of the night. She has an extremely short skirt with sort of some kind of fishnet stocking sort of idea on her, and a witch's hat. And she says that she has a book of evil with her, right? So I'm thinking, what the hell is this like this? Well, so anyways, we go and we start heading back sort of and going along like this, and that was the end of that sort of evening's entertainment. And probably about a month later, I went back to go pick them up again, and they were wanted me to go get them again at this granny's place. And I said, "Oh, what the hell? Maybe I'll see the witch again," and that sort of thing like that. I figured to be entertained. So it was getting more in the evening, sort of like this. It was already dark out and stuff. And I'm going along, and I get around the corner, and there's the old witch lady, and she's out in the front, and now she's with this chick. Okay, right. So like this is this sort of this chick here, Matt. This is what she looked like. She had a witch's hat. She had this, except she had a short skirt. So instead of like that sort of like a yoga like sort of short pants here, she had sort of a short skirt, but the exact same kind of fishnet like stockings. But instead of a leprechaun, this chick also dressed a lot like the leprechauness there that I told you that hung up on a Montreal Road. So a mixture between these two, right? So extremely cute, sort of thing, very much like a Marcia sort of. She looked very similar to her in a lot of ways. Actually, maybe it was Marcia. Maybe that was one of her side personas or something. But anyway, she had with her this bizarre book, and it had this sort of monogram on the front of it, and it looked like it was ancient, like really old, like hundreds of years old. Because I've seen all kinds of old books in old sort of historic libraries and all kinds of stuff like this, and I know with and 5 million antique garage sales and all kinds of things like that. So this thing was made out of some kind of old sort of like possibly. Lamb skin or some kind of weird sort of one like that, some kind of animal like sort of skin on it. But it looked like this giant bling like sort of like, but not a cross. It was so weird I could never see it close enough to really know exactly what it was. And it had these dots or something, some kind of insignias that would go down into sort of the bottom at exact precise spacings as it was going down. So I'm looking at her. I'm saying, "Oh my God, man, that chick is amazing." It's like, well, even if she is a witch or crazy, I mean, I just sort of it's just like, I mean, as far as like cuteness went and everything else, and the outfit was certainly all right, sort of stuff like that. I mean, if you're gonna run into a witch, that's certainly a cuter outfit than you see on most, right? Sort of thing like this. So this is her, and she's panhandling. So she had this sort of book with her, and the thing was is that we're watching her, and and I'm just totally blown away by this chick. I couldn't believe like this girl's dressed like this out in the middle of the night and all this kind of stuff like this. I mean, it was just wild. So she's there, and this guy refused to give her any change like this, and all of a sudden she goes hakara hula blah like this, and she starts talking to the book, and then waving her hands like this and sort of stuff like this, and coming behind the guy and sort of waving her hands like as if she was possibly cursing or possibly some sort like this. So I'm thinking, oh my God, man, what if this chick really is some kind of witch, and that old lady really is some kind of witch, right, of some sort? I mean, I'm younger, right? So, like, I mean, I open-minded enough. I've seen a lot of strange things out there. How the hell do I know, right? Sort of stuff like this. So, anyways, we're watching her for a while, and we decided to go across on the other side of the street because we had to get going back anyways like this. But we watched her doing this for about 20 minutes. The people that did give her change, she didn't sort of zap them or anything and sort of wish them a nice day. But if they didn't give her change, then she started with this weird sort of thing and sort of talking sort of to the book right in the front. You can see her at the lights, and this was just a past like LaFontaine, Montreal Road sort of area, like a few blocks up it, right, sort of thing up Montreal Road. So absolutely the most bizarrest sort of thing ever. But maybe about 2 months later, I started this shift up at this place, and you'd have to sort of go at weird times of night or in the morning to start your shift. And I hadn't been around that spot in quite a while and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, I'm going along, and there she is, man. And this is like really sort of early in the morning, and she was actually in the cold, dressed skanky like this. Right? So then I just like right away, and I said, "Oh shit, man, I can't avoid her because." Like she's staring right at me. If I try and avoid her, I was thinking maybe she's gonna zap me anyways, right? So I had some change on me and stuff like this, and I figured this what she was. Probably I figured she might be like some kind of alcoholic, possibly or whatever, right? Like this kind of idea. I wasn't sure, but anyways, she certainly was cute enough. And I mean, you can't beat the hat and the whole sort of thing, right? So I mean, she was a bit out there, I'll tell you that. But anyways, the so I'm going along, and I start getting past her, and I'm thinking, is she going to speak to me? Is she going to speak to me? And she says, "Sweetie," she says, "I need some change." She says, "I got to get on the bus and stuff like this, right?" So then I said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, like this." So I gave her whatever change that I had in my pocket, sort of thing like this. And then she didn't give me a zap or any sort of bad mojo. I kept sort of walking, and I decided, and I knew the odds of her actually getting on this bus was below zero. So I walked down to the next sort of stop, pretending like as if I was just going on that sort of way like this. So I'm watching her, this guy, and I'm way up the street. This guy walks past her like this. This guy, I could tell, was telling her, like, get lost, you tramp, sort of thing, like this sort of idea. Like, you could tell they were having words of some sort, but I couldn't hear it really that well, sort of thing. And all of a sudden, the first time I ever seen her do this so far, she opens up the book now and starts going hakala like this. She's waving her hands and stuff like this. And so then this guy's like starts freaking out, and he starts running off from her, going down the up Montreal Road, heading towards Saint Laurent, going that way to escape from her. So absolutely the most weirdest sort of thing. So didn't see her again for months. Still was doing the same sort of a shift, and I had to meet this character, and we were gonna go out and sort of go do some night fishing and stuff like that. And he wanted to pick up a case of beer, and there was this beer store past the Saint Laurent. So I said, "Okay, I'll meet you down around that sort of area like that," because he lived near there. And I get off the bus and I start sort of walking. I decided to sort of get off a few blocks earlier, and I just to see if this character was around or any of the sort of entertainment around there. Usually, you'd see at this time, and lo and behold, there she is. Right, so I stayed on the other side of the street, and I kept walking way past. I crossed again to go meet him. He's there, and I said, "You got to see this." I said, "There's this amazingly hot-looking witch," and I said, "She panhandles down here." So he had this buddy with him that I didn't know was going to come along with us or whatever. But anyway, some character that went to his house or whatever. So this other guy's with us too. So we start walking up like this and getting a bit close and watching her, right? So she starts panhandling the same thing, and the people are going by like this, and like all of us were just totally blown away watching her in this wild sort of outfit. So then she starts in front of this crazy one guy here. He says, "Oh, like this," and the guy was still staying at the bus stop, even though she kept asking for change. So I guess she decided to see if she could sort of beef up the bait here. So she starts bending over in front of him in this little sort of skirt, and sort of like as if she's trying to pick something up off the ground or whatever, right? And meanwhile, this guy's head's fixated, right? You could tell from the sort of light of the view of it that his head must have been right in the middle of these in this area, right? So anyway, she turns around sort of like this, and then all of a sudden this guy does give her some change, right? Sort of stuff like this. So then he goes off. Then this other one comes by, and the same thing. He's talking to her, and he basically the same kind of thing, like get lost, she trapped probably, or something like this, because he seemed all upset that she was, mooching this sort of cash. So the same thing, she gets really mad, and she sort of opens up the book again. We're watching this, and I said, "I got to see this closer like this." I said, "Come on, guys, we'll walk just sort of like won't get too much closer, but let's get a little bit closer like this." So we start getting along like this. And then we're getting closer and closer, and we're watching. She's now zapping this guy, saying like this, and she's got the book open and doing all these weird stuff, right? So then this is where it gets so bizarre that I have no explanation for this whatsoever. I mean, now the story becomes extremely weird. The guy then, the same thing, decides to sort of take off. So this time, this guy crossed the street on the other side and said, "Get away from me, you lunatic," and stuff like this. So then she's got the book open, and she says, "Should I tolerate them? Should I tolerate them? These humans are bad. These humans are bad," like this. And I'm listening to this. She's actually screaming this. And she starts heading right towards us. So we start sort of pretending like we're looking over here, sort of like this. And we kind of wobbled out on the sort of road and started walking like as if we're looking over at this sort of stuff like this. And she sort of scooped right past us, seemingly not even sort of noting us. Right away, we sort of turned around like this and said, "Okay, man, let's follow this chick, see where she's going to go and stuff like this." So she bolts around this sort of corner, and there's bushes and trees and stuff like that. So we're watching her. She's right in front of us like this. Now, at the corner of the next street, we're right behind her now. Now we're only staying like about 8, 10 feet behind her, sort of thing like this. You see her go. There's a bush line. It's a solid sort of house at the corner, sort of like this. There's nowhere you couldn't make it and run across the street in time, especially in the hooker like heels this chick was sort of wearing, and this sort of thing. There's no possible way that this girl could have shot across the street, could have ran down the street, could have even made it to the next house to make it down the laneway there. You would have seen her like no matter what, because we were this close behind her. And sort of the second she went around the corner, you actually saw her sort of start to sort of get weird, where she was walking along the bush. Now she's not there, like as if she sort of dematerialized. What the hell, like this? So the guys that I'm with, we're looking on both sides of the bush. We run down to each sort of pathway, laneway, ran in there sort of down their laneway a little bit to look in the backyard to see if she was there. This woman completely vanished out of outer space. So I was completely perplexed by this. We talked about it all night, just couldn't, nothing else would sort of entertain us, right? That's just kept going back to this every sort of second. and trying to figure out what on earth, like, how did this humanly, like, who was this, or like this. So I wanted to figure out, like, maybe that this crazy grandmothers of theirs would sort of maybe have some new information about this girl, like, is she really her daughter, or is that somebody of hers, or what's going on here? And I was hoping maybe I could get some new update from them, so I decided to, what I got in contact with them, and they were going over to that granny's, and I said, listen, man, I said, I want to know about this witch chick here with the hot the outfit. I want to know, like, what she, like, is she really her daughter, because she looks way young to be that old lady's daughter. So I was starting to think maybe it was her granddaughter possibly, or something like this. So anyways, I get there. They said that this lady, the old granny, and her mysteriously vanished one night. Their house just sort of was abandoned, and that was it. They were gone. So, like, and they never seen them after. And that old granny, then she moved from there not soon after and stuff like this. So I was never able to keep up. Did they ever return to the place? Has anybody else ever seen the Vanier witch? Which somebody else did see a witch-like thing, which maybe might have been her, because their outfit and stuff is very similar to like what she wore, and it's a very close area. So I mean, the correlation would be very feasible that really the Vanier witch was still around after that, but absolutely the bizarre. So, anyways, what can I tell you? But here is these guys. There was these young kids. We were teenagers and stuff like this, and these later teens, and this sort of this. These guys, a lot of people, what they would do, there was this old Beechwood cemetery, and it was supposed to be haunted and things like that, and sort of things, and but a lot of kids on the, we you didn't have places to go to drink sometimes and things like that, so kids were quite creative, and there was an actual secret sort of a trap underground room that somebody had created, where sort of teenagers would go down this hole, and you could go party down in this underground sort of rooms. It was hidden underneath this sort of bush area and sort of thing like this, and you could go down there and sort of booze it on down, and there was parties down there, orgies, I've heard. Just about anything else went on in this sort of wacko place. But anyways, this one night, these guys apparently, there was this sort of not far from it was this sort of weird sort of old it's a monastery possibly, or whatever it is. It's way up a White Fathers area, I think they call it, or something like that. And so they were sort of around there, and I guess these priest guys or somebody saw them in some area out around this. They were trying to find this secret den, because they were invited to this party at this secret den place, and they couldn't find it. So they decided to sort of, when they saw these father guys, they started running for the hills with their beer and stuff, and they ended up decided to camp along the Beechwood Cemetery. There was these trees along in this sort of stump like this, and they started hearing this sort of howling and sort of like and screeching and sort of stuff like this. And they're saying, what the hell is this? So they're drinking their beers, and they're listening to this, and they all start getting really spooked out and things like that. And all of a sudden, this friggin' chick, they said she was kind of hot looking, but like ghostly looking. She sort of was in this black sort of dress, and she had a broom in her hand, and she was leaping around and sort of stuff like this. And but her hair sort of was sort of reddish and weird, sort of, but dark, like, because it was all ghostly, like, sort of thing like this. Their description was weird. It was in between this sort of things like this. But this is basically sort of what she sort of looked like, sort of like this. But this lady sort of came out at them and started waving her broom and saying incantations at them, and that sounds a lot like that crazy Vanier witch chick, right? So the same sort of thing, and about the same size. They said she was sort of like a nice figure and all that sort of stuff, and nice long hair and that sort of, like, I mean, it sort of matches, except that they seen her in the dark with all these trees around in the moonlit night and all this sort of stuff. It probably would give this more mystic effect, but she was like in a real witch's gown this time, like a long sort of black one was sort of the thing, right? So I mean, absolutely fascinating. So I have no idea if they saw her, or is there some creepy witch that's hanging around that sort of thing, right? And then other sort of weird things. Another story I got around there that was pretty bizarre too. But anyways, what I forgot to say is when she came out, she started hexing at them and sort of doing this weird sort of stuff. They didn't see the book, so I don't know. Maybe she didn't need it this time. Maybe because she had her broom with her, whatever, right? But anyways, this freaked the living shit out of them, and they actually left their beers there. And I mean, these kids, for them to leave a beer, I mean, you got to be scared. Sort of stuff. So I mean, a Canadian kid typically wouldn't do that sort of thing, but absolutely fascinating. But this is what she looked like, sort of like that sort of idea, right? But another weird story around there was this Pitts place. And even some people apparently had drowned in there. It was a great fish. It was a very entertaining place. You could go there and sort of night fish, and you would be night fishing. And if you walked around the edges, you would find these little space areas with all these hippies. There was witch cults in there that would go in there. Nudists. Quite often, you'd see like a couple of young naked ladies sort of just sunbathing themselves and all this kind of stuff. So, what great a place for a teenage guy to want to go fishing, of course, these rigs or stuff. But I got this wacky story from one of them there. There was this group that we ran into, and they were all having their beers and stuff like this, and they started telling ghost stories. And some of them all admitted to this, that they had seen this on a previous time when they were in there. They watched some kind of fiery sort of light dance across the sort of water, like as if it was a will o' the wisp sort of thing, like that. And this other sort of group that I talked to one time, they had saw some kind of weird witch-like group that was in there, and they were doing weird incantations, and they had this circular-like thing, something like you would see with the pentagram-like thing. All they saw was candles and stuff, and they were all in a circle. So there was definitely in the 60s and 70s, for sure, at least. Now it's all built around by millionaire homes, but back then it was all sort of, and this was no well-known place to go partying and stuff like that, and sort of thing like that. So did they see possibly some kind of ghost that had drowned in there, or one of these will-o'-the-wisps sort of idea like that? So absolutely weird. Anyway, very interesting. So that's like, I mean, there's a bunch of other stories I could have went on to with these sort of ghost-like things. Like there's so many of them, but if you're still not convinced that they exist out there and sort of stuff like that, if you want to see a leprechauness or a pretty hot looking witch, just go down Montreal Road eventually. Maybe she'll appear again. Sort of stuff like this. Or if you're into the more sort of sexy werewolf sort of ladies like this that are a bit more sort of furry like that, if you want to date, just, you know what I mean, hang out either in Quebec or possibly Montreal Road if Madeline comes down looking for Jean Guy. So, but anyway, so they for sure exist. There's definitely some sort of stuff like this. And like I said, a lot of them probably get a bad rap. I'm sure not all of them want to turn you into something or whatever, right? And sort of stuff. But these were certainly different ones, and certainly not the normal sort of witches out there, whatever these people were up to. But they did have some kind of, that girl had some kind of ancient sort of book with her that I presume she got from her granny or great granny or whatever she would have been, right? Because I mean, this chick was like young. I mean, she was pretty, really like, she wasn't massively old. So I mean, I couldn't believe any more from 18 to early 20s at the most, sort of thing, right? So I mean, for her to have a mother that's sort of creepy looking like that, I mean, the father, that must have been a terrifying ordeal. But I mean, so I much more suspect that she was the sort of granddaughter or something like that. But why did they disappear and like and that sort of thing? And how did that girl sort of vanish like that? I mean, still very mysterious to me. But anyways, here let's look at some known sort of photos around the world that have passed the test of time. They were checked out, CGI, this, that. Like a lot of different people checked them out, and they sort of weren't tampered with and things like that. So they were sort of good, sort of interesting ones out there that sort of make you wonder. Like, look at this one here in Esprit Church in 1956. This sort of priest like guy was, they were just taking pictures here. Look, I mean, holy mackerel, man. That's pretty sort of pretty well, pretty out there. That would give me the creeps to tell you sort of thing, but very interesting. Sort of like it looks like he's actually sitting there, sort of like, you know. And this one here, there's an Indiana library there, and they have these cams here to sort of keep an eye out on their stuff, and I guess people stealing books, all that kind of thing. And this ghost has appeared there quite a few times, and they actually got it on picture here. You can sort of see through her down at the bottom, sort of like this, but she might have been a librarian or something like that, because she seems to always be going around books and things like that, right? So absolutely, extremely interesting. Um, this one, I saw the picture of the girl. There was this girl, sort of Mary Lee, right? And she was one of the patients. And I saw the picture from her from this Waverly Sanatorium in Waverly Hills. And I mean, these people were crazy back then. They used to torture them and do all kinds of weird stuff. So, I mean, it wouldn't be surprising. But because I have an eidetic sort of like when it comes to sort of facial sort of things like that, I can see even if somebody's way older, sort of the same weird sort of stuff. And I would give in the highest probability, 99.999%, that this Mary Lee, that an old photo of her is known to exist, matches this girl standing here in 2006. So I would find this quite a credible sort of thing, because this guy would have had to gotten her old photos, messed with a lot, and all kinds of weird stuff, sort of like it's quite convincing, and sort of an interesting one that I find. Now, here is this sort of the Tulip Staircase in '66 of Maritime Museum in England here. This is what I was describing about that sort of Grim Reaper like character. Can you see the three-dimensional sort of stuff? I finally found a photograph that shows what we saw, like except it was pitch black, but exactly like that. Do you see how the robes are sort of like there's little cuts in them and weird sort of stuff, and you can even see the creepy person's hand and this sort of thing. Like it was exactly like that. The guy had the same sort of weird sort of a hood on the top and the sort of stuff like that, except that he had a sort of a cane with him, right? But and he was kneeled down where his bum seemingly was touching the ground on the floor, but his knees were sort of pressed up against him, where his feet were also on the floor, and his robe sort of covered all this, where you could just see the outline of his sort of feet in the front, sort of thing like that. But I mean, that's exactly what that sort of a weird, creepy Grim Reaper guy sort of this what I was trying to explain, where it's sort of like a thick shadow. I mean, it's you can see the shadow in the background. Like, I mean, any person you can see that that's a shadow. But when you're looking at this, you can see the thickness and the sort of stuff like this. This is what I was sort of that we saw, right? So this picture gives me the creeps. I fully believe it's whatever that this guy filmed. Sort of, it's creepy, man. I like this is in the Bachelor Grove Cemetery, Illinois. This woman apparition. The guy was just taking pictures of the sort of the gravestones and things like this, and here she's sitting on one, right? And I mean, there's something weird about the presence of this one. It's sort of something about it, man. I don't know. There's just it's weird, like as if she has a sadness or something, or some kind of weird thing there. It's just out of all the ones I've ever seen, besides the weird things I've actually seen, like where it was sitting right in front of you, as far as a picture goes, there is no more creepy than this. I first saw this in the '60s in that sort of Reader's Digest book I was telling you about that was fantastic, and they had that sort of picture in there. And this reverend guy had taken this in this Newberry church in the '60s, and they tested, a lot of people tested on it. It's authentic, sort of like this. So, I mean, you can actually see through this dude. I mean, what would be the odds of an optical illusion even making these sort of Ku Klux Klan like face mask here and the whole sort of thing? I mean, that is extremely creepy. So, I mean, that entity probably isn't a nice guy. So, I mean, whatever. Wow, like, I mean, absolutely terrifying. I find this picture gives me the living creep. So, I mean, me personally, like, even if I was a skeptic and stuff like this, I would have to wonder in the 1960s as a reverend guy. I mean, I would think he'd have better things to do with his time than be a genius at non-existent Photoshop at the time. That looks like a lot of work there to sort of, it's extremely natural, everything about it. It couldn't be an optical illusion of some sort. That's sort of too weird. I mean, everything about it in the highest probability sort of makes it sort of a much more plausible that that one has some reality to it. It's creepy though. The famous brown lady, 1936, Raynham Hall, England. There, I love that photo. It's absolutely fascinating. It's sort of like I would have. Can you imagine you were standing there and this thing's coming down at you, sort of like and she's walking towards you and stuff like that. That would give somebody the heebie-jeebies from sure like you could possibly imagine, right? But absolutely fascinating. Here, another one. I'm not sure where this one comes from, but another one that was taken that was very similar. And you notice the same even kind of garb here. I mean, absolutely interesting, right? I find that one sort of very interesting too. This one here from the Charleston City ghost, they call it 200-year-old prison, eh? And apparently all kinds of people were dead in there and all kinds of different stuff, right? So, I mean, you can see right through this thing. Looks pretty creepy, sort of like that. Very interesting. This one here gives me the creeps. Look at this ghostly monk guy here, man. Holy mackerel, man. Like you can even see his head is sort of it's in like the guy couldn't have even sort of like if somebody was trying to just take their picture there like that, the guy's face wouldn't even look like that. You can see his face is sort of covering into the pillar, sort of like on the side here, sort of thing. I mean, it's absolutely bizarre. And I mean, and what's this other weird, ghostly, like sort of stuff around it? Is that plasma stuff that they talk about, right, or whatever, right? So, but anyways, that one gives me 11 creeps, and that guy doesn't look too friendly. So another one out there, I would wonder about, right? Like that, absolutely, but out there. Like here's another weird one that was taken in Sunnyvale, California, and the people that were taking the pictures, and there was a pile of people there. They were doing this weird seance, so you got all this weird sort of ghostly stuff appearing here. But look at this strange guy here that wasn't in the original sort of picture. What I find weird about him is he's got a bend at the knee that doesn't seem probable. It's way too high up your frame. That's not where your knee should be. You can see on the other one, it seems like it's more different, and it's why is it wider on one side than on the other and stuff like that. So there's something very peculiar, but they all claim that all of them, nobody saw this human being here. So absolutely bizarre here, this sort of stuff like that. So I mean, I could have showed you probably hundreds more of these sort of thing like that, but just to give you an idea that there definitely probably is some kind of afterworld out there. So yeah, and certainly there's some pretty strange stuff out there, and there's definitely probably some witches out there too, a lot of different stuff. Probably some real nice, intelligent ones. But also probably a few crazy ones out there too, just like any other sort of group of human beings. So it wouldn't be picking on the poor witches there, just like if somebody wants to, there's that week of people and all these different ones that don't seem to be causing anybody big harm here, sort of idea like that. So just they want to, and of course it makes sense. I mean, in ancient times, people would have been prejudiced against them. So of course they'd have to go out in this sort of moonlit sort of stuff and do these weird sort of things out in the sort of dark somewhere to stay away from prying eyes and that sort of thing, right? So quite feasible why that sort of practice would have happened ages ago, not because they're strange, sort of, well, I mean, some people would, but I'm just saying, like, whatever their ritual to them, they actually believe whatever it is that they're believing in. So to them, this isn't strange. They're doing normal procedures because they think this appeases whatever entity or somebody they're talking to or that sort of thing. But the thing is in ancient times, they might have been prejudiced against and stuff like this. So you would build in this sort of thing in your cultural sort of stuff over time, right? So it makes perfect sense. I mean, I suppose a lot of people would find this weird, right? And they'd be spying on them and all that sort of stuff like that, right? So it would be just a normal sort of thing. So it doesn't mean that what they're doing out there is sort of, they're not sacrificing poor Jimbo down the street sort of thing. Yeah, there is kooky cults like that too, but I mean, a vast majority of these probably aren't like that, right? And they're just want to do their thing in private, sort of thing like that, without people sort of snickering at them and all that sort of stuff like that. So I mean, it makes sense to me anyway. Right? So I mean, if some people want to go around in a circle out in the middle of the night in a forest and have candles and stuff, who are we to sort of knock them for sort of thing? But here I want to talk about next. Welcome to the cryptozoology show. And now we'll talk about the one of the most weirdest cryptids probably ever in the universe. There is the vanmeter monster. This bizarre cryptid is a near one of a kind sort. A whole town after mining in the area, there was these old abandoned mines and something, and this is where these creatures seemingly it came from. Several times, the two beasts harassed local residents of the town, from a bank manager to this. It wasn't I have in here by accident a mine foreman. It was a foreman of this other sort of place, and in 1903 this had happened, and this is an actual photograph of the thing. This is the weirdest sort of thing ever. What they sort of surmised is that there's was these abandoned sort of mining tunnels down there, and something might have disturbed them, or for some reason they decided to sort of come out of there for some sort of reason. But the thing is that this thing here is absolutely very strange for 1903, for some guy to make up some gimmick. There's a lot of things wrong with this. You have a whole town, a lot of different sort of people saw this by the second day was the whole town was in mass panic and things like this. This one person gets a shot of one of them, sort of thing like this. This thing had a unicorn's horn on its head, and out of it this light diode sort of thing would glow, and apparently it could shoot sort of like light at you of some sort, like a laser beam like sort of thing. Right? So but here's the thing is normally I would bypass this sort of, like, if there wasn't this one photo here. I know what photos look like back in these kinds of things like this. So you have the original newspaper from was the what was it, the Des Moines something or other. Anyways, it was the Daily News, Des Moines Daily News, one of those. And so, anyways, they had this one sort of article about it, and this bank manager saw one of these creatures flying at his window. But there was two of them. At the last sort of reports, two were seen around this abandoned mine shaft, and they went down into it, sort of thing. But here's the thing is that you got a flying sort of cryptids, okay? So people saw this things flying, or at least one of them anyways, that we know of for sure because there's a photo of them. Now here's the thing. If it was some kind of gimmick to get people to come to the town and this sort of thing like this, it seems extremely sort of weird that why would you sort of go through all this sort of wild stuff here, get all your different town citizens to lie for you, to say that they've seen it, just so that they can garner up a little business here for the bank? Back in those days, much more people were religious and an average belief in God and things, and much less of this Darwinism or things of today. So any people in those days would have relegated this as some kind of satanic bat monster of some sort, right? So I doubt the last thing that would do would be want you to sign up for a bank. Would you want to walk down the street with something that has glowing luminescent horn that can shoot laser beams at you? Like, I mean, seriously, this doesn't sort of make any sense at all. So I doubt very much that was a gimmick for that, for multitudes of reasons. So I'm a person who eliminates sort of the most probable usually, and usually something like this would be to me a gimmick. It's extremely hard to believe that there's 8, 10, 12 foot tall bat monsters flying around that have unicorn horns with glowing laser beams that come out of them. But nevertheless, you got this conundrum here. I don't believe the person that took this photo. Okay, so you only got the one sort of photo, at least that I know of. I've never seen any others about it or anything. This is the only sort of one. So this guy gets this photograph here. This person, somebody in the town or somebody on a giant building like that would have seen them coming up on the ladder and the slide. And you'd have to have, there wasn't that many people back in those days that would have had availability to them ladders of this sort of height. You would only have this in a very rare, so there wasn't like as if you could go down the general store and start buying 300 feet tall sort of a hammer ladders and stuff, right? So I have problems with these things because you could clearly see there is a light diode sort of glowing in this creature's head in the center here. The outfit is extremely bizarre. Like, I mean, for somebody to sort of, okay, so just think about it. Somehow you got to get this guy up on top of this sort of bank, right? Sneak him up there without the other residents see him to give you everybody the good scare. So let's say the bank funded it or something, right? And maybe they had a secret ladder. So even at that, now you got this guy up here. Even when it's not windy, there's little drafts the higher you are up in that place and things like that. This guy is right at the freaking edge here, okay? So, like, this guy's got his wings lifted up like this, or at least one of them. It looks like there's another part up this way, but whatever the case, like, so he's got his at least one of these giant wings floating up, right? Okay, so you got this guy and he's got this. The wind easily, I mean, you're right at the edge here. You're taking an awful risk here that one little sort of fluke that poof. Then, even at that, let's say it was a guy in a suit still. Now we have the biggest conundrum of all. People have seen the thing, numerous ones of them, where they blew away, right? Or went and flew down a mine shaft. So now you have to then think that the bank manager or other store people that were involved with these local merchants, let's say, right? Then they'd have to sort of have a sort of also that this creature can fly. So it's pretty hard to believe that you invented a suit in 1903 before the Wright brothers were even flying, sort of thing. That somehow you're able to fly around and sort of in this suit, right? And then also, I mean, they didn't have sort of ever-ready batteries here laying around here, or Duracell or all this gang, right? So the thing is then how would you sort of? It's much harder in those days to create. What this is not a lamp on his head. It's not some guy sitting there put a lamp on it. The light is wrong. It's like sort of weird. It has a luminescent strong sort of property to it. You can see this. So here's my thing. You got two possibilities, well, three possibilities. One, that all these people went through a lot of trouble for a 2 day event that was only blurbed in a paper, didn't seem to get national attention of any sort much, and this sort of thing. So then, if it was all this sort of gimmick, then why is it that the creatures never appear again? No suit again. I mean, if this is what you're doing, you're telling me you went through all this expense to make this wild Batman suit, right? And with a giant unicorn horn that somehow you got your hands on. So, like, I mean, they didn't have plastics then, so they would have had to, I don't know, carve it out of wood or something and glue it on the guy's head. But now you got the glowing effect and all these other sort of stuff to add to the entertainment value. It sounds a bit out there, sort of thing like that. So, this is the thing is that you're stuck with these conundrums where you sort of, it's the technology likely for some guy to have some kind of you know what I mean, wild radium property with him that's glowing like this all the time. Then and sort of it seems extremely unlikely, as well as why would these Batman creature, Bat ladies, whatever they were, why wouldn't they appear again in the future? I mean, once you got this gimmick going, even if 10 people showed up extra in the town as tourists or reporters, that seems like a lot of expense on your end to sort of go through all this, right? So then also you got to get all these witnesses to cooperate with each other. And the last thing that is known about them is that these two creatures were seen shooting down this sort of abandoned mine shaft. So, what if it was possible that they were doing something around there, some kind of, maybe even somebody was doing some mining that they're not aware of or whatever, things like that? Because I had talked to this historian ages ago that was in this sort of region about this sort of thing, and he had mentioned that he had heard that sort of that somehow there was sort of mining possibly that had been going on, and maybe it sort of disturbed them, or some kind of construction that they might have been doing around this sort of area. So let's say that's feasible, some kind of methodology like this. These creatures wake up some reason or whatever, right? Some kind of thing like this, and they sort of finally come out of these caverns, and there's some kind of subterranean sort of unknown bat species to science. I mean, there is giant bats. There's some in the Philippines. Like I told you, the giant bat vampire lady that sort of this Philippine lady that I interviewed sort of saw it. I mean, this thing was like at least like 8 to 10 feet sort of tall, with giant sort of bat wings that look like a female, because it has like a chest on it, so that they presume it's a female sort of thing like that. But I mean, I presume that both exist. It's just maybe some weird optical illusion that maybe makes them look more femalish or malish at one point or another. Yeah, sort of in the dark, right? I'd imagine when you're staring at a 10-foot scary bat monster's face, you might make little mistakes along this sort of thing because you're petrified, right? But nevertheless, is that these things do exist in other places, something like that. There was even in the sort of in over in Vietnam. A lot of people don't know this, but there was there's this one cave where all these sort of army guys, the first army guys went down there. They were attacked seemingly by some kind of underground subterranean bat creature of some sort, some kind of thing. And locals have legends there about some kind of thing like this. It's kind of similar. And so they started sending more army guys down, and each time when they'd send some of them down, the guy be talking like this, and you'd hear like this, like some kind of crazy sound. The guy would say like like this, and then the guy would be eaten or killed instantly. So after sending so many of them, they actually stopped doing it, and these poor people's bodies never been recovered and stuff like that. So what if it's feasible? I mean, no way that any scientist could know this or not. I mean, so that would be just as hypothesis, just like we're hypothesizing here, stating that it could be feasible, that there is many subterranean sort of creatures that we don't know about. I mean, all kinds of cave creatures are found all the time that are new to science and things, and it's extremely feasible some of them might sort of adapt some kind of weird, you know what I mean, like glowing, like sort of luminescent properties. I suppose if you were a bigger creature, maybe the sonar isn't that great sort of a thing, or maybe you got both, but that possibly you might need some kind of thing like that, that would sort of, help you guide through in the darkness or stuff like that, help you find prey of some sort because, like, I mean, I can't imagine they would live off of mosquitoes, I mean, sort of things, right? And maybe they have developed some kind of weird sort of, the unicorn horn is almost like a natural sort of light, where possibly there's some kind of luminescent bacteria or something that lives in there, and then it's able to sort of charge up sort of, and then shoot the beam, goes through the unicorn sort of like horn here to make sort of like a flashlight beam as they're flying underground. I know it sounds crazy, but I mean, it would be sort of feasible. And again, all I can say is that there is luminescent sort of things like that out there known in existence, and there is creatures that have luminescent properties. Even that sort of the roping and stuff like that, they've been filmed many times, and it shows exactly something like what you're seeing here, except this guy's just got it on his head. So what if it's feasible that that there is sort of ancient underground tunnels and things that we're not aware of, where there could be sort of like trapped life down there, where maybe, yeah, they can get out somehow, but it could be that there's sort of subterranean sort of little cavern systems that might have strange things like some kind of natural plant life and animals down there, like its own little ecological sort of system. And somehow these sort of things, and somehow these creatures got disturbed and decided to come out. They were shot at quite a few times, and apparently one guy said that it reeked like a stench, some kind of thing like a Bigfoot like phenomenon. I'd imagine it would stink living in some kind of deep sort of cavern like that, and sort of thing like this. But this isn't the only tale like that. There's quite a few lizard monsters. I had read all these reports back in this other sort of place. I think it was in where the hell again was it? Was it New Mexico or Arizona? One somewhere up in that sort of region, like one of those more sort of western sort of, sort of thing, like heading towards that way. It was one of those states. There was all these same things, these mines, and these guys kept going down there, and there was these lizard men that were down there, and then would sort of people started vanishing one after another, so they stopped actually sending them down, trying to get the other ones, the exact same sort of thing. So it's very feasible. I mean, there's a lot of creatures that have been found in these underground caving systems and things like that. And there could be giant worlds down there that we're not aware of. Like very, very large cavern underground systems and things like that. Where creatures got somehow survived through the floodal system or different sort of things like that and evolved sort of quite differently or something like this. Because all I can tell you is the odds of these guys coming up with this is extremely weird, because you have to have a bunch of people that didn't even believe in the thing to the last moment when some of them saw it. Just quite a few saw it over a sort of this 2 day sort of span. The last sightings of them, that at least that I know of, is they went down this sort of tunnel. Different people shot at them. One guy claimed that he did get it of some sort, like heard it a little bit, one of them, sort of thing like that, and it stunk. But besides that, it seemed like their bullets weren't harming them much. And I mean, it would be feasible with that even as well, because this is sort of like a bat. If you get them in the sort of wings like that, they're not going to be bleeding 5 million blades. Like, that's a very different sort of system there. So it would be feasible that probably most of these people would have missed, and they just happened to get lucky where they didn't get them in any vital spot, and they might have made a small little hole in this giant bat monster's wings sort of idea, right? So they might be able to still fly anyways, right? Sort of thing. So that's even feasible. All I can tell you is that I don't believe that. I mean, you only had this for a little bit of time. You have all these sort of random people that sort of see the thing. These creatures were curious, and sometimes at a few witnesses, they shot a laser beam like thing at them, like as if they were sort of beaming their light down. Maybe that's how they hunt the prey. Like they can focus sort of their luminescent properties on and make it sort of like a flashlight like sort of idea. So we think we invented the flashlight. Maybe this creature's been around since John began living in our caves, sort of since the last flood at least or something, and this sort of thing. But I mean, all I can say is that I cannot discount this cryptid, even though I think it's the most insane sort of thing I've ever seen. I have a hard time with it in every way, shape, or form that you can humanly get. But I know there's these things. There's people would have saw you almost impossible to have ladders of this height to get you all the way up there and stuff like this, unless the bank manager and different people let you up through some kind of system to get up on the roof, sort of thing like that. So it sounds like a lot of stuff when nobody benefited from this. I can't see religious people running over when they're seeing a devil monster up on the top to now join the bank. They would have kept this action going and had the band monsters flying around at different sorts. You then would have to explain how were they able to get these guys in suits to fly. So either all those people hallucinated that part of it. You see what I mean? There's a lot of problems here that no matter which way you look at. And this photograph, you can clearly see there's a glowing sort of thing right in the center of his skull, I guess, where the horn is, right? So, I mean, absolutely the most fascinating sort of creature. Out of all the sort of cryptids I've ever sort of studied, I would say this one is the weirdest of near the weird. but there's something about it that I just can't sort of push under the carpet, and I have the highest suspect that it actually was real. Like, so either that's some kind of weird aliens that live underground, that's sort of a whatever, right? Sort of idea like that, or that it's some kind of unknown sort of bat that's developed the luminescent sort of property. It is possible there's unicorn horns and other creatures around the world, one horn sort of thing. So certainly, like I said, unicorns have existed in the past. And so, I mean, it would be feasible that this one horn sort of defense or machoism or machoette, you know what I mean, depending, like sometimes the female has the more vibrant sort of things, a sort of thing like that. So, whenever the case, in whichever one scenario, it would all be the same that this creature looks very tall too, like compared to sort of, I know those kind of buildings and the things like that. I've been in Iowa and things like that. I never was in this exact sort of spot. I never saw this place, but I mean, still, it was absolutely fascinating. So, but anyways, apparently some people have even written a books about it or something like that. So there's probably a lot more to it and stuff. But I picked up these tales over the ages here. It's been around for quite some time, but I mean, a very interesting one, and sort of like that. I've only ever found one newspaper report about it, sort of like that, but I'm sure there's others. I find it surprising that this didn't catch on at least a little bit, especially like if somebody had enough brains and shot that picture out to some of the press somewhere. I mean, you would think if you were doing it for a gimmick, I mean, any person, I mean, if you're smart enough to come up with all this, you'd think you'd know about that parts of it too. And you would suspect that these people would have sort of also then got, you know what I mean, like this a bit more arranged to make sure all the news wires know about it better and all that sort of stuff and get the attention out there, right? And then now you got 10 zillion news reporters coming to take pictures of the monsters and all that kind of stuff. You all of a sudden your ice cream cone parlor and everything else that you might have is just booming with business. But no, instead they deal with it completely a different sort of way here. I mean, there's too many things wrong with it to state that it was some kind of gimmick, because I mean, why wouldn't the suits come out again in the future? Why didn't somebody admit to this a few years later or on their deathbed or something, right? So, I mean, what am I supposed to say, right? Like, I can't argue with the photograph because there's something really creepy about that thing. I mean, because I know that it's not possible. The guy didn't have a flashlight with him, sort of like this. He wouldn't have had sort of a lamp wouldn't look like that. The light is very wrong for that sort of thing. It's very luminescent-y looking. Plus, all the people saying this unicorn horn. So what the guy invented a flashlight on the top of his skull, that somehow he had these piles of sort of battery like contraptions in there to get running things. I mean, it doesn't, none of it makes any sense. It would be much more feasible that sort of really the telling the truth, that it's some kind of weird sort of underground subterranean sort of animals that we're not aware of. So I would suspect some kind of large unknown bat species to science. I mean, this would explain, I mean, there's reports of these sorts of things all over the United States, from especially this Jersey Devil. If you look at the Jersey Devil's depictions, okay, of the face and this sort of thing like that, you can find bats over in the Philippines that look exactly with the same sort of face, like a horse's, more like a goat sort of thing. There's ones that look exactly like that with the same kind of beaks like that. This is, I'm highly suspect, because I'm telling you the same thing like that. Marianne Winkleman is the best witness I've ever seen. I fully believe this woman beyond human comprehension, sort of thing like that. Even her son, you could tell the guy didn't even want to speak about it. He seems to be like still freaked out from it, sort of stuff like that. The husband of the whole gang, and I mean these footprints. I mean, if you saw this, that's another sort of one like this, right? Like, it's similar, it's except this guy has a horn and a glowing sort of thing on it, and the other one sort of doesn't. But I mean, he's got hoops, more like a sort of a, you know, sort of more like a horse sort of thing like that. And it would be feasible that some kind of creature would develop that sort of thing. Maybe the cave systems that he uses or whatever, it's more better for him to sort of have this harder sort of material down on his feet for some reason, right? Like sort of instead of claws, maybe they are claws, but maybe they have sort of, I don't know, like some kind of weird sort of bonish calciumy like sort of buildup all around them that gives it this sort of look. Like maybe they can stand upright, like some kinds of, yeah, certain bats don't hang upside down, right? And things like that. They actually stand sort of like more up, sort of. So, I mean, just like this sort of creature's doing. So it's feasible, these things. And I mean, there is these weird things in Vietnam of a similar like creature reported. The my bat lady friend from the Philippines there, and all this sort of stuff. So there is these weird sort of ones out there that they're all around the same size. You notice that, like between bare minimum, the smallest sort of ones you'll get is about 5, 6 feet sort of thing. But most of the time they're about 10, 8, 10 feet, 12 feet, 15 feet, in this sort of range, like this, these gigantic sort of ones, but nothing beyond that sort of much, like at least almost zero reports of that sort of thing. So, anyways, I definitely find this one of the most fascinating sort of beasts ever, sort of in the history annals of cryptids and things like that. So, there's some books out there, like I said, so I haven't read them, but I mean, if you want to check that out, I'm sure you can, these guys probably have all kinds of other information that I didn't mention here and things like that. So very interesting. Anyways, it's just another sort of weird cryptid out there. I love all these odd ones like that because they're very interesting. Where I can't push them under the carpet, there's too much for it going. So even though I'm extremely skeptical, I can't explain why. Like, why wouldn't you keep the action going? Why would you use such a crappy sort of advertising system to get 5 people to come and look at this? How did you get them to fly? That would mean that all of the people that were witnesses lied for this gimmick. But if they did that, why wouldn't they be promoting this better? Why wouldn't the monster appear again? Why, like, I mean, none of these things make common sense in the advertising world. I studied business and things. People don't do that sort of. They wouldn't just make a one-time peep unless they got the reaction they needed. That a million, photographers all shot down there to get this sort of thing. Now you got all the action going. You completed your purpose. You might not need to sort of do it, or to keep low so that way everybody thinks it's still a mystery or whatever, right? But instead, you don't have any of these sort of correlations to fit any of these things. These things were possibly from this one historian who was talking to, that said that possibly there might have been some kind of mining. They were, even though the mines were abandoned, they might have been fixing or working on something or doing some weird thing, or some guy was illegally looking around there for sort of gold deposits or whatever it was that they were, whatever kind of mining that they had there. But the thing is that something caused these things, maybe an underground sort of earthquake, who knows, like some kind of weird thing where it caused them to leave their mine shafts. They would have this glowing luminescent thing as some kind of adaptation to live down in such a dark environment like that to find food, because I don't think they could survive off of sort of mosquitoes. They'd have to be eating a dirty shitload of them. But they could live off underground creatures that live down there, like rats or weird things like that, right? So maybe that would help them sort of be able to sort of do that sort of thing. But anyways, what can I say? So hopefully you enjoyed this interesting show about ghosts and sort of other the witches of Vanier and these different stuff. And hopefully you got some entertainment out of some of these. Certainly enjoyed doing them. And but anyways, just telling you a lot about the world of the weird and the strange, and certainly love to get your sightings. So there's a website link there. I always leave it in the description box too, or you can contact through the comments and things like that. You can be anonymous if you like, sort of thing like that. The main thing is we're just always trying to get to the sort of truth of these sort of things, and get this sort of the more information we know about each creature, the better sort of, if any of them actually do exist. At least that way, if you could sort of prove this, then you could sort of at least protect their habitat and things like that. We got this corona world, we got all these evil sort of things going on, and things like that. So there's no use killing off our animals too and things like that. So even if you don't want to believe in them, when you feel wrong, bad if you found out, if you're an animal person, you didn't believe in, let's say, the thylacine, but you ignored all these sightings, and all of a sudden there was only a few handful left, and now some idiot sort of kills them because they're poisoning the area that the government allows them to do poisoning and things like that, but for the ranchers and things. Wouldn't you feel bad all of a sudden if they found one dead and it was happened to be the last ones where they might have survived if we weren't doing that, right? So think about these things. I mean, it's important. So even if you're skeptical of them, why not give the creature a chance, even if you think it's a 99.99% chance of imagination? There's still that little percentage, right? And sometimes that happens. So, anyways, hopefully you enjoyed the show, and stay tuned. And next time we'll be doing some more cryptid sort of beasts. Bye for now.